Hey guys, tonight's story begins with mud that sounds alive, a tunic that smells like regret, and a bow that looks like it's already disappointed in you. Your boots squelch like soggy bread, your arrows rattle like unpaid debts, and even the crows look offended you showed up. There's no honor here, no glory, just sore shoulders, bad decisions, and a target that's about to remind you it hates you more than anyone else does. But before you get too cozy, take a second to gently tap that new hype button YouTube just added. It really does help little guys like me push through the algorithm. And take a second to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy this strange little corner of quiet storytelling. And drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's strangely comforting to know who else is drifting off with us around the world. Now get comfortable, let the day melt away, and we'll drift back together into the quiet corners of the past. The sun is not so much rising as it is peeking, ashamed, over the hill like it's also recovering from whatever happened last night. Dew clings to every blade of grass, every wrinkle of your poorly stitched tunic, and, most unfairly, your exposed armpit, which is still stuck to a patch of moss that will now be a permanent part of your personal ecosystem. You're not entirely sure what day it is, but you can tell by the taste in your mouth that it involved ale, a wager, and possibly an onion. You sit up slowly, like a man trying not to frighten a squirrel that may or may not be nesting in his hood, and take stock of your situation. You've got a boot, one sock, a bow that looks vaguely insulted, and a face full of regret. Your quiver lies a few feet away, spilling its contents like a drunk vomiting up secrets. 2 arrows are still somehow in your boot, which is impressive, because you don't remember putting them there. One is slightly bent and smells like soup. The other is fine, except it's definitely stolen. The fletching is dyed blue and smells like someone wealthy and recently punched. You make a mental note to return it never. A crow lands nearby, tilts its head, and stares at you the way your mother used to when you said you wanted to be an archer. It caws once and flies off, clearly unimpressed. You pull yourself to your feet with the grace of a collapsing haystack and immediately remember your back exists. It has opinions. Most of them are angry. You rotate your shoulder, hear a sound like someone stepping on a dead frog, and call that good enough. Your surroundings are, at best, aggressively rural. A field stretches in every direction like someone spilled a giant bowl of green soup. The tree you slept under looks no healthier than you. There's a fence in the distance made entirely of ambition and rotting wood, and a cart stuck in the mud beside it that may or may not contain a sleeping man and at least one unconscious chicken. The village is somewhere beyond the haze, probably still deciding whether to bother waking up. You do not live in the village. You technically live near it, somewhere to the left of respectable and down the lane from disappointing. Your bed, if one can call it that, is usually a cot in the barracks, or a pile of something warm and questionably alive in the stables, depending on how much you've annoyed the captain. Last night must have been particularly offensive, because this tree doesn't even look like it wanted you here. You gather your things with the tired efficiency of someone who has done this before. You shake your bow once, mutter an apology, and sling it across your back. The string hums faintly, still damp, still sullen. You pluck it experimentally and wince. You'll need to wax it again. Not that you have any wax left, but you're fairly certain the tanner's boy has been hoarding some in his sock. You make another mental note to rob him gently. As you walk, or more accurately, hobble toward the road, you pass a rock that looks suspiciously like the one you tripped over yesterday. It doesn't move, but you swear it's smug. You flick a pebble at it and miss by 3 feet. Clearly, your legendary accuracy has not survived the night. You sigh and trudge on, boots squelching in the sort of mud that feels like it has opinions about your choices. A breeze picks up, carrying the unmistakable scent of goats, bread, and someone burning something they absolutely should not be burning. At the edge of the field, A boy stands holding a stick and pretending it's a sword. He sees you, gasps, and immediately announces to no one in particular that the archer has risen. You nod at him solemnly. He runs off screaming. You feel a little better. The village gates, port, wooden, leaning, and open, mostly because the hinges gave up years ago, to come into view. Inside, the marketplace is stretching itself awake. A cart of turnips groans into place. A woman yells at her husband to stop yelling. A dog chases a pig with the kind of grim determination that suggests this is not their first encounter. You duck into the lane between the blacksmith's and the tavern, hoping to avoid conversation, eye contact, and responsibility. The tavern door creaks open just as you pass, releasing the scent of old ale, fresh regret, and a barmaid named Ellsworth who might still be mad about the thing with the dice and the borrowed chicken. You duck faster. Behind the tavern, you find the rest of your unit, if unit can be defined as 4 people and a goat who refuses to leave. Tall John is sharpening an arrowhead on a rock that probably isn't meant for sharpening. Agnes is braiding her hair with twine and something that glows faintly. Ferret is asleep, face down in a bucket of water, snoring bubbles. You nod at them. Agnes waves. The goat stares. No one says good morning. It is not, objectively, a good morning. It is a morning, and that's about the best anyone can say. You sit on a log that may or may not be a chair and begin inspecting your arrows. One is cracked, one is sticky, one is technically a stick with feathers glued to it. You sigh. Someone slaps your shoulder. It's the captain. He looks like someone who has both fought in 5 wars and lost every single one to paperwork. He grunts, scratches his chin, and says, "Training today. You missed the first round." You look at the sky. The sun is barely up. Training, you think. Excellent. A chance to demonstrate your skills and potentially lose another arrow to a rogue goose. You nod and rise, bow in hand, arrows in a bundle that rattles like your dignity. You take a deep breath. The mud squelches beneath your feet. The goat sneezes, and so begins another day in the life of a medieval archer. Not with glory, not with honor, but with sore feet, a stolen arrow, and the vague hope that no one asks you to hit anything too far away. The bow leans against the wall of the barracks like it's judging you, which it is. It has every right to. You've dropped it, bent it, used it as a walking stick, and once, you mistook it for firewood in the middle of a particularly sleepless winter night. You only realized your mistake because the string slapped your ear like a ghost with a grudge. Since then, you've tried to treat her better. You've even started talking to her, and not just in the comforting oneself while hoping no one is watching way, but in full conversations. Her name is Martha now. You didn't pick it. It just arrived in your brain one morning after a dream involving honey, blood, and your old tutor yelling something about sinew tension. Martha feels right. Martha feels inevitable. You run your hand along her length, fingers careful, reverent. The wood is you, or mostly you, or maybe not you at all, but something that sounds like it when you say it fast and don't look anyone in the eye. It's warm from the sun, slightly warped from the rain, and has a new crack that you absolutely did not cause and will lie about forever. She's tall, just over 6 feet, which means she looms. She does not lean, she waits, like judgment or the tax collector. Stringing her is a ritual, one you approach with the nervous respect, usually reserved for lighting unstable lanterns or speaking to noblemen who might be drunk. You brace the bottom tip against your boot, arch the bow against your thigh, and start pulling the string up and over. It creaks in protest, not unlike your knees, and halfway through the motion you get a splinter in the web of your hand. You swear quietly. Martha is unmoved. She was made for war, not comfort. With the string finally in place, taut and humming like a held breath, you take a moment to admire her. She doesn't sparkle. She doesn't gleam. She's not polished or carved or blessed with fancy runes by a wandering wizard who owed your grandfather a favor. She's just a bow. But she's yours, and that makes her more terrifying than most wives in the village, and considerably less forgiving. You test the draw, slowly, carefully, because last week you pulled too hard and popped your shoulder like an old gate hinge. The string stretches, the limbs flex, the tension builds. It feels like pulling against fate, or dinner debt, or your Aunt Mildred when she's decided it's your turn to shovel dung. You release without an arrow, and the string slaps forward with a noise that startles a pigeon off the roof. It flutters into the sky like it's late for something, and you briefly consider trying to shoot it. But then remember you haven't eaten yet, and low blood sugar makes you miss and cry. Your arrows sit nearby in a bundle of contradictions. Half are too short, one is too long, and one has been sharpened so often it's more suggestion than weapon. You pick through them until you find the good ones. They aren't labeled, but you know. The way a cook knows which potato is best for roasting. The way a dog knows which sock to steal. The way a mother knows which of her children is most likely to fall into a well. You knock one, just for show, and raise Martha again. You aim at a tree. It's not moving. That helps. You draw, breathe. Imagine the arrow piercing the bark cleanly, majestically. Then Agnes walks by carrying a bucket of eels, and you lose focus. The arrow goes wide, skips off a rock, and disappears into a bush that may or may not contain a sleeping soldier. A muffled yelp confirms that it does. You lower the bow slowly. Martha, for her part, is blameless. You apologize anyway. The sun climbs higher. The courtyard buzzes. Somewhere, someone is yelling about the latrines again. Someone else is trying to ride a barrel like a horse. You ignore them. You and Martha have work to do. You unstring her gently, stroke her spine, and whisper something vaguely encouraging. She doesn't reply, which is probably for the best. You once met an archer who swore his bow talked to him. He now lives in the woods and eats moss. You sit down with a cloth and begin the ritual of wiping her down. You use beeswax and spit and prayer, because that's what tradition demands. You buff the limbs, inspect the string for fraying, and check the knocks like you know what you're doing. You do. Mostly. Except for that one time when you tried to oil her with bacon fat and spent 3 weeks explaining the smell. She deserved better. Now, you know better. Your fingers are calloused, your palms permanently etched with bowstring ghosts. You've lost count of how many times you've bled for Martha, how many times you've missed your target and blamed the wind, how many times you've hit your target and then apologized to the wrong person. One time you shot a helmet off a noble's head. He was amused. His horse was not. Martha has seen things. The inside of a siege tower, the back of a tavern, a duel in the snow that ended with 3 dead chickens and a new scar above your eyebrow. She has cracked ribs, dried blood, and a tiny chip from where you dropped her down a well. You retrieved her, of course. You dove in. It was shallow. Your pride suffered more than your bones. But you came back with Martha, cradled in your arms like a child who just insulted the king. You glance around the yard. Other archers are practicing. Most of them are trying too hard, overcompensating with flourishes and flair, twirling their bows like dancers, showing off their fletching like it's embroidery. You roll your eyes. Amateurs. Real archers don't need flair. They need silence, patience, and a bow that forgives nothing. Martha isn't beautiful, but she is terrible. In the old way. In the way storms are terrible. In the way judgment is terrible. In the way something simple becomes sacred through repetition and blood and the unspoken knowledge that one day she might be the only thing standing between you and the kind of death that gets turned into a song. She creaks softly as you shift her on your shoulder. Not complaint, not farewell, just acknowledgement. The goat walks past, dragging a string of garlic and what used to be the captain's laundry. You both ignore it. Tomorrow you'll fire her in a contest. Next week, a skirmish. Next month, if you survive, she'll need restringing again. But for now, she's clean, taut, and quietly dangerous. You rest her beside you on the bench like a sleeping blade. Your fingers itch for the next shot. The field is already half sun, half mud, by the time you shuffle out with your quiver slung low and your boots squelching like wet bread. You're late. You know this. The commander knows this. The target knows this. It stares at you from across the clearing with the blank, emotionless expression of someone who has seen many arrows, and not a single one of them impressive. Your fellow archers are scattered around, pretending to stretch, pretending to focus, and absolutely not pretending to judge you. You feel their eyes like fleas on a dog, unwanted, itchy, slightly aggressive. You find your spot, the one no one else wants, because it's slightly downhill and inexplicably smells like soup, and plant your feet. You stretch your arms out dramatically, as if that will distract from the fact that you forgot to wax your bowstring again, and it now sounds like a dying lute whenever you draw. Martha gives you a small, bitter groan as you pull the string back, as if to say, "You've had better mornings." She's not wrong. The first shot is meant to warm up. A light, easy draw. You aim. You breathe. You imagine glory. You hit a tree stump 20 feet to the left. It's not even a particularly good tree stump. It's old, gnarled, and, worst of all, smug. The arrow lodges deep, quivering with the kind of dramatic flair usually reserved for bards and possums pretending to be dead. You sigh. You trudge over. The stump says nothing, but its silence is deafening. You grab the arrow, pull, and it doesn't move. You pull harder. It moves a little, and then stops. You plant a foot on the stump and grunt. Nothing. This is now your life. Publicly losing an argument to a dead tree. Having a moment, are we? The commander's voice cuts through the morning like an axe through pudding. You don't turn around. You can already picture his expression. Disapproval, mixed with a thin film of long-suffering disappointment. He could bottle it, sell it as a tonic for humility. It moved, you say. It is not a good excuse. It is not even an excuse. It is the verbal equivalent of falling down the stairs and blaming the stairs for existing. It moved, he repeats, as if testing the words for poison. The tree stump moved. You nod solemnly. Quick little bastard. There's a pause long enough for a rabbit to have a midlife crisis. Then, footsteps retreating. You breathe out. Crisis postponed. You glare at the stump one more time for good measure. Retrieve your arrow with a final wrench and return to your station. You mutter to Martha. She stays silent, though you're certain she agrees the stump started it. The next few shots are slightly better, in the sense that they hit things. Unfortunately, those things are not the target. You graze the side of the hay bale once, which feels like progress. You count it. You even do a little bow, which earns you a rock thrown by Tall John, who is not tall and has not forgiven you since you borrowed his sharpening stone and returned it rounder than before. Agnes, 2 stations down, lands 3 arrows in the bullseye like she's sneezing them out. She doesn't even look up afterward, just wipes her nose with the sleeve of her tunic and knocks another arrow while humming something that might be a murder ballad. You consider being impressed, but you're still too mad at the stump. Ferret lets one fly and hits the top corner of the target so hard the arrow splinters. He cheers like he's just won a kingdom. The commander gives him a nod, a real nod. The kind of nod you dream about while sleeping on a damp cot in a room that smells like boiled socks. You want that nod. You want it badly. You draw again. You whisper to Martha. She purrs in string speak, and you release. The arrow zips through the air, majestic, fierce, utterly wrong. It arcs with enthusiasm and embeds itself directly in the helmet of a practice dummy 2 targets away. The helmet wasn't even on the dummy. It was hanging on a fence post. The commander sighs. Somewhere, a dog begins barking with the tone of someone who has seen this happen before. "Discipline," the commander shouts without looking. "Form, focus, Stop aiming like you're trying to impress the wind. You don't respond. You're too busy pretending you meant to do that. You attempt to refocus. You shake out your arms, roll your shoulders, and give the target your most serious glare. The kind of glare that says, I may be an underfed archer with hay in my hair, but I am extremely dangerous, or at least trying very hard to appear that way. You draw slowly, methodically. You breathe in. You picture glory. You breathe out. You release. You hit the stump again. This time, the arrow vanishes entirely. One moment it's there, flying proud and slightly to the left. The next, it's gone. No impact, no bounce, just gone. You blink. You walk over, slowly, like a man approaching a cursed well. You search. You poke the stump. You dig. Nothing. The arrow has ceased to exist. The stump has claimed it, absorbed it, eaten it. You are unwell. You straighten, brush your hands off on your tunic, and glare at the stump. I will destroy you, you whisper. The stump remains impassive. That makes it worse. I need that arrow back, you say. It was one of the good ones. The stump says nothing. You wonder if stumps can be smug. You decide they can. You kick it. You regret that immediately. The commander is walking toward you again. You can hear the boots. You consider running but realize you would have to leave Martha behind, and that is unthinkable. You face the music. The music has a scowl and smells like pipe ash. What exactly are you doing? He asks. Diplomacy, you say. With the forest. He squints. The forest? The stump, sir. It has demands. He stares at you for a long time. Then he turns and walks away. He's either giving up or choosing to deal with you later. You're not sure which is worse. By the time practice ends, you've hit 3 targets, missed 12, and are down 1 arrow, possibly to a sentient log. Your string finger is raw, your boots are damp, and your pride is mostly mush. But Martha, sweet Martha, is warm in your hand. You give her a pat. You did not succeed. But you tried. You survived. You annoyed a tree. You call that a win. Your quiver is not organized by logic, weight, or length. It is not color-coded, labeled, or even especially clean. It smells faintly of onions and regret, and once contained a frog for 3 entire days before anyone noticed. But it works. Mostly. It rattles just enough to warn small animals and occasionally children that you are nearby and underfed, and it's the one thing on your person that might be considered dangerous in the right light. You do not sort your arrows by function. You sort them by vibe. The first section is for bodkins. Sharp, narrow, and meaner than a nun with a full teacup. These are your go-to for punching through armor or the illusion of confidence. They're plain, no-nonsense little rods of fury, and you treat them with the respect normally reserved for tax collectors and hangover cures. Most of your bodkins were issued, but at least 2 you bartered for with a man who may or may not have been a wizard. They haven't glowed, but they also haven't broken, and that's good enough for you. Then come the broadheads, wide, flat, and with edges that say, I don't just kill, I ruin Tuesdays. These are the messy ones. They're what you use when you're aiming at something that doesn't deserve subtlety. Deer, for example. Or banners. Or that one time the enemy general's hat was just begging for a dramatic statement. They tear through flesh, fabric, and any hope of plausible deniability. You keep them wrapped in a bit of cloth so they don't shred your quiver lining again, although it's too late for the lining and the cloth is starting to look like it witnessed a minor war crime. Next to those are your fire arrows, stored separately in a bundle of wool and poor decisions. You haven't lit one in weeks, mostly because the last time you did it was windy and someone's barn got involved. You apologized. The cow has not. These arrows have pitch-soaked tips and just enough unpredictable behavior to make you feel both powerful and vaguely nervous whenever you look at them too long. You keep them for sieges, signal fires, and dramatic exits that you haven't quite gotten around to making yet. There's one arrow you simply call the emergency. It's heavy, crooked, and the fletching is made of something that once lived in a goose but now resembles dried seaweed. It whistles when you knock it. Not from design, from trauma. You found it under the floorboards of the barracks, along with a note that read, "Never again." You cleaned it, sharpened it, and haven't dared use it. You save it for bar fights, not the kind that start loud and end with singing. The other kind, the kind that involve furniture, paternity accusations, and at least one person yelling, "He has the eyes of a thief," while brandishing a spoon. The fork arrow lives alone. You didn't make it. Someone did, possibly as a joke, possibly as a form of art. It's a real eating utensil. 3 tines, bent slightly at the neck, lashed onto a shaft with twine and either beeswax or hardened cheese. You don't know why you keep it. Maybe for moral support, maybe as a threat, maybe because, on some subconscious level, you believe there will come a moment where only a fork will do. You've considered throwing it out, but every time you reach for it, you hesitate. Something about it feels patient, like it's waiting. The rest of your arrows are the usual collection of workaday pointy things. Some are slightly warped. One is very warped and has a story you refuse to tell sober. A few are fletched with feathers so mismatched it looks like they lost a bar brawl with a chicken. You keep your favorites near the top, balanced, smooth, not too flashy, but accurate enough to embarrass someone from across a field. One has a notch you carved yourself, which probably weakened the shaft, but it helps you find it in the dark. You once used it to scratch an itch on your back. You try not to do that anymore. You do not number them. You do not name them. They are not friends. They are co-workers, tools, extensions of your will and your increasingly creaky shoulders. You mend them when they break, fletch them when the wind starts playing games, and oil them when you remember, which isn't often, but you do it with love when you do. Each arrow has flown further than you've ever run. Each one carries the possibility of ruining someone's day or saving your own. And sometimes, when the night is quiet and you're staring into the middle distance like a man with regrets and a bladder full of cider, you wonder how many of them are still out there, embedded in trees, lodged in walls, buried in helmets, or maybe just stuck in someone's barn, reminding a farmer not to call archers lazy ever again. You take them out in the mornings and line them up like tiny soldiers. You check the shafts for cracks, the tips for dullness, the fletching for missing feathers or unusual smells. Once, you found a spider living in one. You named him Harold and gave him his own arrow. Harold is gone now, probably off starting a guild. The commander once told you that every archer lives one shot away from glory and one shot away from stupidity. You've tested both theories thoroughly. Glory feels nice. Stupidity itches and requires an apology from someone you've never met. Still, you keep loading that quiver, keep checking those points, because the truth is, each arrow is a question. You don't always like the answers, but you love asking. You shoulder the quiver. It rattles slightly, not from disrepair, from anticipation. There's a tournament in 3 days, a chance to prove you're more than just the idiot who hit the baker's cat last winter. A chance to use the good arrows. A chance, if you're being honest, to maybe try the fork. You smile. Martha hums. The quiver creaks. Today might be the day. It starts with a small hole, a polite hole, a discreet little opening under the arm of your jerkin, like your clothing is trying to develop a personality and has decided to start with passive aggression. You ignore it for a week, maybe 2, until one morning you raise your arm to scratch the back of your neck and hear the unmistakable rip of dignity escaping your body through a widening tear. You look down. Your jerkin now has what can only be described as aspirations. Specifically, aspirations of being a vest. You mutter something unkind under your breath and decide, with misplaced confidence, that you will fix it yourself. You've seen people sew. It looks simple. In and out, up and down. A needle, some thread, a bit of squinting, and perhaps a minor blood sacrifice. What could possibly go wrong? You borrow a needle from the quartermaster, who gives it to you with the look of a man handing a fish to a toddler and saying, "Good luck." The thread you find in a pouch tied to your bedroll, which you are reasonably sure once belonged to someone else. Probably someone who didn't mind orange thread, because that's what you've got. Not a subtle orange either. A blazing, sunlit, scream for help kind of orange. The exact color that says, "This repair was done by someone under duress." You sit on your bunk, squinting at the hole like it's insulted your lineage. Martha leans nearby, watching silently, possibly judging. You thread the needle with the delicacy of a man trying to thread a spider through a catapult. It takes 3 tries, 1 curse, and a moment of deep personal reflection, but eventually the thread is in. Victory. Small, petty, immediately undermined by the fact that you don't know where to start. You poke the needle into the fabric, pull it through, and stab it back again. That feels right. You repeat this motion with growing speed and zero elegance. After about 10 stitches, the hole is still there, but now looks like it has a fringe. You frown. You try again, this time going the other direction, which makes it worse, as if the fabric is resisting your help and actively mocking you. You tie it off anyway. You are done. You are a craftsman. You are a man with thread-based skills. Then you try to put it on and realize you've sewn the sleeve shut. Not just a little shut, entirely, fully. With the kind of commitment usually reserved for vows or vendettas. Your arm goes in halfway and stops. You wiggle, you grunt, you pull. You curse with a creativity that surprises even you. When you finally get free, your pride is tattered in exactly the same way your jerkin isn't, and you sit in silence, reevaluating every choice that brought you to this moment. You consider living with it. Maybe sleeveless is fashionable. Maybe if you rip off the other sleeve, you'll look like a mercenary. A very cold, poorly stitched mercenary with questionable taste and orange thread accents. You dismiss the idea. You are not yet that far gone. You bundle the jerkin under your arm and trudge into the village. The seamstress's hut is at the far end, next to the goat that always looks like it's plotting something. You knock once, then again. You're about to leave when the door swings open, and there she is. Anwen the seamstress, a woman with hands like steel traps and a glare that has unpicked more than one man's ego. She looks at your face, then at the jerkin, then back at your face. "Ah," she says. "You tried." You nod, shame already curling in your stomach like spoiled milk. She takes the jerkin from your hands with the air of someone accepting a challenge, or perhaps a tragedy. She flips it over once, twice, snorts at the stitching, and begins to undo your work before you can say anything. "I charged old Tom a song and a kiss last week," she says, not looking up. "He gave me a cough and a story. You don't have either of those, do you?" "I have eggs," you offer, pulling 3 slightly dented ones from your pouch like they are rare jewels. One of them wobbles. You don't think it's supposed to. She eyes the eggs, then she eyes you. Then she eyes the jerkin again, which is now halfway back to a functional state. Her needle moves like lightning, like vengeance, like she's racing death and death owes her money. Within minutes, the hole is gone, the sleeve is open, and there's even a little decorative stitch at the edge that makes it look intentional, like you're a man with flair, like you meant to survive that battle with a touch of embroidery. "That'll be 2 eggs, she says, folding the jerkin neatly and pressing it into your chest. "And a flirt." You blink. "A flirt?" She raises one eyebrow. "I'm bored." You hesitate. You clear your throat. You attempt something that might be a wink, but feels more like a blink with ambition. She stares. "Did you just threaten me with a seizure?" she asks. No, she chuckles, a sound like linen tearing. She takes the eggs, tucks them into a basket, and waves you off with the kind of hand motion usually reserved for livestock. You take the jerkin and flee, managing to trip on the goat's rope on your way out and nearly fall into a trough of suspicious water. You recover with only minor dampness and one wounded sense of self. Back at camp, you slip the jerkin on. It fits. It fits better than before, actually. The sleeve moves, the seams hold. The little stitch catches the light just enough to look like it has stories. You sit on your bunk. Martha leans beside you, still silent, still judging. You hold up the orange thread you didn't use and think, for one brief moment, that maybe next time you'll try again. Then you remember the sleeve, and the goat, and Anwen's eyebrow. You put the thread away. The moment you step into the archery tent, you know you've made a mistake. The air smells like damp wool, old onions, and something that might have once been cheese but now has the consistency of ambition gone sour. There are 3 people inside, and each of them turns to look at you with the quiet, unsettling focus of animals that were never properly domesticated. You raise a hand. You consider saying something brave. You say, "Hi." Tall John stands first. He is not tall. He is, in fact, aggressively average height, but apparently someone called him Tall John once during a bar brawl, and he beat them with a bench, so it stuck. He wears a tunic that might have once been green, and boots with soles so thin you can see the memories of past blisters. He walks like his knees are trying to get away from each other. His face breaks into what might be a smile or might be gas. "So," he says, "you're the new pointy stick." You nod. He nods. You both keep nodding until Ferret intervenes by falling off his stool. Ferret is called Ferret because he once lived with a family of actual ferrets for 2 months, or maybe because he smells faintly of burrows and danger. His mustache could sweep a floor, and probably has. He wears it like a warning. He scrambles upright, knocks over a bucket, and salutes you with something that could be a potato or a hardened piece of bread. Either way, it makes a thud when it hits the ground. "You got teeth?" he asks. You blink. "Yes?" he grins. "You'll need 'em." That feels like a threat, but he's already whistling something tuneless and tying feathers to his boot for reasons you will not inquire about. Then there's Agnes. Agnes does not rise. She does not smile. She doesn't even blink right away. She's sharpening an arrowhead with a rock that's probably seen more blood than the average battlefield. She once shot a deer clean through a window, a table, and the town's best wedding cake. She never apologized. You know, because people still bring it up during festivals. She glances at you, sniffs, and returns to her rock. "You'll be dead by Tuesday." You don't ask why. You just accept it like one accepts a storm or a prophecy scrawled in the mud. You sit. Tall John tosses you something round and suspiciously soft. "Turnip," he says. You stare at it. "It's your turnip now," Ferret adds. "Welcome." There is silence. Then Tall John starts singing. It's not a good song. It's not even really a song. It's a chant with aspirations and a tempo that actively resists rhythm. The lyrics are mostly about bladder control and how it's important not to wet yourself during battle unless it's part of the plan. You don't ask what plan that would be. Agnes starts drumming on her boots with the hilt of her dagger. Ferret hums along, slightly off-key and entirely enthusiastic. You sit there, clutching a turnip that may be older than some laws, and wonder how much worse it can get. They stop singing only when the commander walks by the tent and yells, "Some of us are trying to train you tone-deaf sheep." Ferret shouts back, "We're welcoming the new one." The commander mutters something about archers being more trouble than they're worth and wanders off. You feel seen. After that, the hazing begins. Not the dangerous kind, not really. No fire or goats or unpleasant liquids. Just questions. How many arrows can you shoot before your arm falls off? What's your opinion on ducks? Be honest. Do you sleep with your boots on? You should. The rats. Ever fired an arrow at a bishop? Hypothetically, they ask with the casual tone of people who've seen things burn and laughed anyway. You try to answer but quickly learn it's less about your answers and more about how long you can keep a straight face. Agnes never laughs. Not once. But she watches you like you're an experiment and occasionally nods when you say something that amuses her, like, "No, I've never kissed a ferret," but I'm open to personal growth. After an hour, they declare you acceptable. Ferret tries to spit in his palm to shake your hand but misses. Tall John smacks you on the back hard enough to make your lungs question their career choices. Agnes carves something into a piece of wood and tosses it at you. It's a crude representation of a bow and an arrow. It's also clearly got legs. Name it, she says. You call it Gerald. She nods once. You do not know what any of that means, but you understand on a cellular level that Gerald must now accompany you everywhere. They teach you the rules, not the written ones, not the kind with parchments and ink, the real rules. Never drink from the brown jug unless it's Friday. Never bet against Agnes unless you enjoy pain. Never, under any circumstances, touch Ferret's special quiver, which contains nothing but lint and a drawing of a pigeon. They test you with a mock sparring match, which is less of a match and more of Tall John trying to trip you, while Ferret shouts advice like, aim for the eyebrows, and pretend you're left-handed. Agnes sits on a barrel and judges everyone. You fall twice, win once, and somehow end up with a loaf of bread in your boot. You do not ask. At night, you sit around a tiny fire built in a shield because Ferret says, the ground is cursed, and share stale biscuits and stories that may or may not be lies. Agnes talks about the deer through window incident like it was Tuesday. Tall John insists he once shot an arrow so straight it came back and hit him in the butt. Ferret tells a story involving a chimney, a duck, and a noblewoman's corset. You laugh so hard your ribs ache. You look around and realize you don't regret this quite as much as you thought you would. They're mad. Entirely. But they're yours now. And Gerald? Gerald gets his own spot by the fire. The morning starts like every other, with the sound of someone shouting and something catching fire that definitely shouldn't be. You open one eye. Ferret is standing over you, holding a bucket that smells like regret and dishwater. He grins. You consider death as an alternative to getting up, but Ferret tips the bucket just slightly, and you decide to live after all. You roll out of your blanket and into the reality of camp life, which is neither glorious nor particularly clean. Your boots are damp. Again. Not from rain, but because you left them too close to last night's cooking pot and someone thought they were additional stew containers. You squish as you walk. It sets the tone. You're assigned wood detail, which means hacking at half-rotten logs with a borrowed hatchet that's blunter than the village priest's sermons. The handle is splintered and has initials carved into it that don't match anyone you know. You suspect the hatchet has a history, possibly criminal. You swing, and the log laughs at you, not literally, but emotionally. You chip a flake off the bark and feel accomplished until Tall John appears, splits 3 logs in a row without breaking eye contact, and walks off chewing something that may be tobacco or yesterday's disappointment. You return to your pile and double your effort. The next swing bounces. The one after that connects but sends a shard of wood directly into your shin. You curse, trip over your own pride, and land flat on your back, staring up at the sky, which is currently judging you in a very blue, cloudless way. Ferret walks by, sees you sprawled in failure, and says, "That's the spirit." You don't respond. You are becoming one with the dirt. Eventually, you give up on splitting wood and move on to helping with the midday meal, which consists of vegetables that gave up hope last season and a broth that may have once been meat adjacent. You stir it. It doesn't help. You add a pinch of something that looks like a spice and smells like sadness. The pot hisses. You back away. Agnes tastes it with a spoon she keeps in her boot and gives you a look that could rust iron. She doesn't say anything. She doesn't need to. You try to serve stew without spilling, but the ladle has a crack, and your grip is questionable at best. Your boots, already damp, now carry the scent of root vegetables and mystery. You consider removing them and living as a barefoot woods hermit. But then you remember your feet. They are not built for hermitry. They are built for socks and quiet suffering. Somewhere behind the tents, a commotion erupts. You hear shouting, something that sounds like swordplay, and the unmistakable bleat of an angry goat. You jog over in time to see one of the younger soldiers fencing with the camp goat, which has acquired a helmet and absolutely no patience. The goat lunges. The boy squeals. There's a blur of fur and steel. The fight ends when the goat headbutts the sword clean out of the boy's hands and then sits on it like a smug potato. Nobody claps, but you all feel it. The goat is named Gerald II. No one knows what happened to Gerald I. No one asks. The goat answers to nothing and respects no one. He once ate half of Ferret's bowstring and then licked the commander's boot like a dare. You make a mental note not to sleep near the food stores. You think about home. It comes uninvited, like a memory you keep under the bed in a box marked later. You think about the smell of bread baking in your mother's hearth and the sound of chickens that don't scream like banshees at 3 a.m. You think about the cooper's daughter who once caught you staring and asked if you needed medical assistance. Your mother wanted a match. You wanted an escape. The army accepted you with open arms and a training manual full of lies. You sigh. You poke the stew again. It still resents you. Later in the day, you're told to help with repairs on the south tent, which is sagging like a metaphor for your posture. You hold the rope while Tall John hammers in a peg with the back of an axe, swearing gently like a man reciting poetry. The rope snaps once, twice, then holds. You both pretend it was intentional. The tent doesn't fall. That's what counts. The sun begins to drop. Ferret lights a fire with flint, steel, and a look of triumph that suggests he once set fire to something truly important and never looked back. You sit around the flames with a bowl of the stew, now slightly more edible thanks to Agnes sneaking in half a turnip and a dried something that might have once been a fish. You eat. You listen to the stories roll in like mist. Half true, half nonsense. All good. Someone sings. Badly. Ferret joins in. Worse. Agnes plays a tune on a whistle she carved from bone and doesn't explain. You find yourself laughing before you remember why you shouldn't. You smile before you realize it. Later, as the fire dies and the night presses in, you lie on your bedroll, boots off, feet slightly less tragic. You stare at the stars. You don't know their names, but they're there, steady and bright and quiet. A goat snorts in the distance. A log creaks in the wind. You don't want to be here, but you're not sure you want to be anywhere else. You are summoned to the chapel before breakfast, which is never a good sign. Nothing wholesome happens before breakfast. Executions, confessions, and mysterious blessings all seem to prefer the cold, grumbling window between waking up and realizing your boots are damp again. You arrive yawning, half-laced, with a breadcrumb stuck in your eyebrow and the faint hope that this is all a mistake. It is not. The village priest stands waiting in the churchyard, flanked by 2 altar boys, 1 sheep, and a bucket. The sheep looks unsure about its role. So do you. The priest is Father Ulrich, who speaks in riddles, smells like wet pages, and has a beard that appears to be studying for priesthood on its own time. He once gave a sermon entirely in bird calls. You didn't understand a word of it, but the geese were deeply moved. He gestures for you to approach. You consider running. You approach. There is a small table set up with a cloth that might have once been white, a wooden bowl full of something that shimmers like gilt, and your bow, Martha, laid out like she's about to receive last rites. You glance at the priest, then at your bow, then at the sheep, which blinks once, slowly, as if to say, "This is your life now." "Today," says Father Ulrich, "we sanctify the instruments of divine precision." You blink. "My bow?" "All bows," he clarifies. "But yes, yours." Martha is ready. You are deeply unsettled that he knows your bow's name. He picks up a sprig of herbs that smells like something between mold and hope, dips it in the bowl, and begins flicking droplets onto Martha with the enthusiasm of a man who once baptized a barrel. The liquid sizzles slightly on contact. You tell yourself it's holy water. It is not holy water. You're pretty sure it's cider. The sheep coughs. "May your string stay taut," the priest intones. "May your shaft fly straight. May your aim be true. One of the altar boys giggles. You pretend you didn't hear that. The priest waves a hand in a complicated pattern that might be a cross, might be a bird in flight, or might be his attempt to swat away an insect. Then he leans in very close and whispers something to the bow. You do not ask what. You do not want to know. He steps back, wipes his hands on the tablecloth, and says, "It is done." You nod politely and take Martha, who feels heavier now, either from spiritual significance or residual cider. You leave the churchyard with the vague sensation that something has been set in motion and you are not in control of it. The sheep follows you for half a mile before getting distracted by a boot. Back at the practice range, you decide to test your newly blessed weapon. The target is a straw dummy shaped like disappointment. You notch an arrow, pull the string, aim dead center, and release with the confidence of a man recently blessed by ecclesiastical forces. You miss. You do not just miss. You miss so completely that the arrow flies past the target, through a gap in the fence, and lands squarely in the rear end of a pig rooting around for beet tops. The pig squeals. The pig bolts. The arrow is fine. The pig is fine. You are not. You chase after it, shouting apologies, tripping over rocks, and mentally drafting a letter to your future self that starts with, "It was the priest's fault." The pig leads you in a full lap of the camp, during which Ferret cheers, Agnes laughs, and Tall John bets against you with someone you've never met. When the pig finally slows down, it is not because of you. It is because it has decided you are beneath its notice. You retrieve the arrow. You apologize to the pig. The pig ignores you with contemptuous dignity. Later, you return to the range and try again. This time, you hit the target, barely, off to the side, but enough to make the straw dummy tilt like it's reconsidering its choices. You nod. Progress. Until you realize that your next arrow has somehow tied itself into a loop. You did not know arrows could do that. You blame the blessing. At dinner, the story of the holy pig spreads faster than fire in a haystack. Ferret insists the pig was a demon. Tall John claims he saw wings. Agnes carves a pig into the side of your mess tin with her dagger and hands it to you with solemn ceremony. It is now your official emblem. You are, apparently, Pigbane. You protest. No one listens. Father Ulrich visits the camp later to bless the cooking pot. It boils over and extinguishes the fire. He calls it a miracle. You quietly hide Martha behind your bedroll and ask her not to speak Latin in her sleep. That night, you lie awake wondering what exactly the priest whispered to your bow. Was it a prayer? A curse? A recipe? You imagine him mumbling secrets into the wood grain like an old wizard trying to convince a stick it's special. You wonder if this is what all archers go through, or if you've been singled out by fate and livestock alike. Martha sits beside you, quiet and still. You close your eyes and dream of pigs in helmets and priests in trees and an arrow that finally hits something useful, like expectations. You don't wake up ready for battle. You wake up because Ferret is throwing pebbles at your face and shouting, "It's today. It's today." Like a child announcing a festival. Except instead of sweet cakes and questionable dancing, today offers potential death and the smell of unwashed chainmail. You sit up slowly, mostly because you slept on a rock, and now your spine folds at 3 extra angles. You rub your eyes, look around, and realize everyone else is already awake and strapping on gear with the enthusiasm of people who've accepted their doom and just want breakfast first. You try to find your other boot. It's not in the usual place, which is somewhere near the first one. After an increasingly desperate search, you find it under Gerald II, who has decided your footwear makes an excellent throne. He doesn't move. You bribe him with a carrot stub and a vow of silence. He accepts. Your armor is light, which is a polite way of saying non-existent. Archers don't wear the full metal suit. That's for knights, show-offs, and people who can afford to sink in rivers. You get a leather jerkin, a helmet that smells like sadness, and a vague hope that no one notices you on the battlefield. You sling your quiver over your shoulder, check your arrows, all still sharp, some still straight, and give Martha a little nod. She doesn't respond, but she knows. The march is muddy. Everything is muddy. The sky is gray, the road is worse, and Tall John keeps singing a marching song that includes the word gizzards far too often. Ferret hums along in harmony. Agnes sharpens her arrowheads while walking, which is either impressive multitasking or a cry for help. You try to stay focused, but it's hard when your left sock is slowly migrating toward your toes and your right foot is convinced your boot contains a beetle. When you reach the battlefield, it's not a field. It's a slightly wider piece of mud with a few bushes and the vague outline of something that might once have been a fence. The enemy is across the way, equally muddy, equally miserable, and waving banners that look like laundry in distress. A trumpet sounds, or tries to. It wheezes like a dying goose, and everyone pauses, unsure if that was the signal or just someone choking. It was the signal. Everything happens at once. People start yelling. Horses start snorting. Arrows whistle through the air like angry bees. You panic and immediately trip over a root, landing in a ditch that smells like old soup and defeat. You stay there for a moment, considering your options. You could crawl out and die with dignity, or you could argue with your boot, which has come halfway off and refuses to go back on without a lecture. You choose the boot. Eventually, you manage to climb out of the ditch, soaked to the knees, and spiritually compromised. You find your position, notch an arrow, and aim at a vague shape wearing armor and yelling something unpleasant. You release. The arrow flies with the grace of a drunk pigeon and smacks into the side of the target's helmet. It makes a satisfying clang, like a bell that regrets everything. The man doesn't fall. He just looks confused and walks off. You count it as a win. Your second arrow sails wide, bounces off a tree, and disappears into the underbrush. You don't even try to retrieve it. That arrow is free now. It's found its purpose, and it's not you. Then comes the third shot. You pull the string, steady your aim, breathe like they taught you, and release. For a glorious moment, the arrow arcs perfectly through the air, slicing between wind and chaos like a hero returning from exile. It is beautiful. It also hits you. Not directly. That would be embarrassing. Instead, it catches on your sleeve mid-release, twists in midair, and bounces off your own helmet, leaving you momentarily deaf and extremely betrayed. Martha says nothing. You suspect she's judging you. You stumble back, clutching your head, blinking through tears and irony. Ferret appears out of nowhere, covered in mud and grinning like a man who just survived a goose stampede. He offers you an apple. You take it. You don't eat it. You just hold it like a symbol of lost innocence. The battle rages on, but you remain mostly on the sidelines, firing occasionally and ducking often. You hit another helmet. You graze a shield. Once, you definitely hit someone's horse, but they don't notice, and the horse looks like it's seen worse. At one point, Agnes walks past you with an armful of enemy arrows and a slightly smug expression. You don't ask how she got them. You're not ready for that answer. Eventually, the fighting slows. The yelling becomes groaning. The mud becomes more populated with people lying down and pretending it's a spa. You and the rest of the archers regroup behind a hedge that provides absolutely no cover, but does smell faintly of rosemary. The commander gives a speech. You hear none of it. You're too focused on the fact that your helmet has a dent now, and it's in the exact shape of your own arrowhead. Ferret starts singing a victory song, which involves stomping, clapping, and incorrect geography. Agnes tells him to stop before she introduces his kidneys to daylight. You sit down. You look at your arrows. 3 are gone. 1 came back with a chip in it, and a story it refuses to share. You're tired, sore, and incredibly aware of your own mortality, but you're alive. And somehow, despite the chaos, the noise, and the self-inflicted concussion, you feel useful. Well, sort of. The contest is held in the village square. which is more of a triangle if you're being honest, and definitely not level in any direction. Someone's ox cart is parked too close to the makeshift firing line, and one of the targets is clearly a wheelbarrow turned backwards with a red circle painted on. But everyone is gathered anyway, because it's been 2 weeks since the last festival, 3 days since the last punch-up, and half the camp needs something to yell about that doesn't involve trench foot or soup rations. You arrive with your quiver slung over your back, Martha cradled in your arm like the moody spouse she is, and the steady certainty that this is going to end in at least one argument and some passive-aggressive loaf-throwing. You sign your name on a piece of parchment held down with a rock and a suspicious smear, and then take your place behind the firing line, which is denoted by a rope, a chicken, and 2 slightly confused children playing tag with a cabbage. Greg is already there. Greg, whose name you cannot say without a small internal snarl. Greg, who once borrowed one of your arrows, returned it snapped in 2, and claimed it came that way. Greg, whose smug little goatee curls like it was designed to be offensive. Greg, who wears his bow like it's a fashion accessory and not an implement of skill. Greg, who you definitely don't think about when throwing rocks at trees alone in the forest. Greg, you nod at Greg. Greg nods back. It is the politest thing either of you has ever done to each other. The competition begins with a horn blast that sounds suspiciously like someone falling into a jug, and the first round is basic target shooting. You take your position, notch an arrow, and breathe. The crowd hushes. Martha sings in your hands, familiar and warm. You release. Bullseye. People cheer. Not many people, but enough that you tilt your head like you weren't absolutely aiming to impress them. Agnes claps once, sharply, and goes back to carving an apple with a knife that should not be allowed near fruit. Ferret starts singing your name to the tune of a drinking song. You ignore both. Greg steps up next. His first arrow hits the outer ring, a respectable shot, if you're into mediocrity. You smile a very small, very polite smile that says, "That's adorable." Greg sees it. Greg narrows his eyes. Round 2 is trickier. Moving targets. A wooden contraption someone built while drunk rolls by with a stuffed dummy tied to it, arms flailing in slow motion like it's drowning in the concept of dignity. You shoot again. Another solid hit, just under the shoulder, if the dummy had bones. It doesn't, but you get the points anyway. Greg shoots and clips the dummy's ear. If it had ears. The judge marks it with a shrug. Now the fun begins. Free-for-all accuracy round. Everyone has 3 arrows. The targets are all up at once. No assigned lanes, just skill, speed, and the ability to not scream when someone fires too close to your elbow. You notch your first arrow, aim for the far target, and release. Center hit. You spin on your heel, notch the second, and fire at a mid-distance ring, slightly low, but still good. Your third arrow is already in your fingers when you see it. Greg's target. It sits there, unbothered, unwounded, waiting. You hesitate, then you let the arrow fly. It lands with a thump in Greg's outer ring. Not enough to ruin his score, but enough to make a point. A sharp, wooden, barbed point. Greg turns his entire body to glare at you. You blink innocently. The judge looks between you, then marks it down with a little sigh. Technically, it was a legal shot. Technically, the round ends. You tie for first, with Greg. The final round is a duel. Not to the death, unfortunately, but to a score. 5 shots each, alternating turns. The tension could be cut with a spoon, but no one brought spoons, because this is archery, and not soup. Greg goes first. He hits dead center. You match him. He hits slightly right. You go left. Equal again. Third round. Greg's arrow skims the line. You bury yours deep in the red. A lead. Fourth shot. Greg nails it. You do too. Final shot. Greg breathes deeply, pulls the string, and lets go. The arrow slices through the air, true and fast, and lands, just touching the edge of the bullseye. The crowd makes the sound of collective uncertainty. You step up. You inhale. Martha hums. You aim. Then you look at Greg, and you aim for his target again. Your arrow lands half an inch from his last one, even closer to the center. You turn, bow slightly, and walk off the line. People erupt. There is cheering, arguing, at least one dramatic gasp, and someone starts yelling about sportsmanship like that's a thing that ever mattered outside of bedtime stories and church sermons. The judge eventually rules it as a violation of the spirit of the rules, but not the letter, which is basically just fancy language for "I'm too tired to deal with this." You're handed a victory ribbon. Greg is handed second place and a look of betrayal. You both shake hands like gentlemen who absolutely want to throw each other in the river. Later, at the tavern, the story is already changing. You hit the same arrow as Greg, someone says. You split it clean down the middle. You did it blindfolded. You kissed the bow for luck. You carved Greg's name into the shaft. No part of that is true, but you don't correct them, because sometimes archery is about precision. Sometimes it's about power. And sometimes, just sometimes, it's about reminding Greg that you're still here and you're still better. The rain begins as a whisper. A few innocent droplets falling on leaves, a gentle patter on your hood, the kind of rain that poets romanticize and farmers bless. You're not fooled. You know the signs. The clouds gather like a village council ready to fine you for walking too loud, and within an hour the sky opens up with the vengeful force of every forgotten bathwater poured out at once. You are not dry. You are not even damp. You are soaked in such a thorough existential way that your ancestors feel it. Your boots squelch with every step, like they're trying to escape your feet. Your tunic clings to you like a needy ex. Your hood gives up entirely and just folds over your eyes whenever you bend your head. Martha, your longbow, is not speaking to you. She hates the rain, loathes it. You try to keep her dry under your cloak, which now smells like wet goat, but the humidity has seeped into the wood. She's warping slowly, moodily, like a woman betrayed. Her string droops like a deflated noodle. You attempt to restring it, slip, and nearly take out your own eye. Martha remains unimpressed. You retreat to your tent. It leaks, not in a dramatic, cinematic way where a single drip falls rhythmically into a puddle while you stare into the fire and contemplate mortality. No, your tent leaks from all directions. The left seam drips steadily down your back. The center sags and collects rainwater in a pouch directly above your bedding. You try to move the bedding. You discover your bedding is already bedding for several varieties of mushroom. You lie down anyway. At this point, you figure becoming part of the forest ecosystem is a valid lifestyle change. You wring out your socks. They make a noise that should not be possible from fabric. You consider throwing them in the fire, but then remember the fire doesn't exist. No one has been able to light one in 3 days unless they're a sorcerer or ferret who swears he can do it by glaring. His tent smells like burnt beard and optimism. You don't ask questions. On day 2 of the rain, the camp descends into madness. Not open chaos, just soggy despair. The kind where everyone sits around chewing on jerky like it wronged them personally and arguing about whose turn it is to dig the trench that's supposed to drain water, but mostly just makes more puddles. You draw straws. You lose. You spend 2 hours shoveling mud from one side of camp to the other, only to find the water has followed you like an affectionate duck. Your arrows are damp and unhappy. The fletchings are curling. The shafts are swelling. One of them looks like it might sprout leaves. You do your best to dry them, laying them out in the communal tent near the non-fire, but someone knocks over a bucket and now half of them smell like pickled onions and the other half are just gone. Agnes claims she saw a dog run off with them. You don't have a dog. You start talking to Martha more. Not in a cute, endearing way, in the way that makes tall John slowly scoot away from you during meals. You find yourself apologizing to her, promising her sunshine, promising her victory, promising her a new string made from the hair of Greg, if you can ever catch him sleeping. Martha remains silent, but you sense her judgment growing heavier with every damp hour. You try to sleep. Rain drips on your forehead at regular intervals, like a very boring torture method. Your pillow has become a sponge. Ferret sings a lullaby from 3/10 over, something involving fish and treason. Someone else is crying, but quietly, like they don't want to interrupt the ambiance. You stare at the ceiling of your tent and seriously consider converting to monastic life. The monks have roofs, and beer, and clean socks. By day 3, you are a changed person. You no longer react to wetness. You accept it. You become one with it. You are a soggy, shivering creature of the bog, and you will never be dry again. Your quiver is now a birdbath. Your cloak makes a squelching sound when you walk. You try to fashion a new bowstring out of horsehair and optimism. It snaps. So do you. At one point, you try to practice. You squint through the rain, draw your bow halfway, and let the string slip from your fingers. The arrow travels 3 feet, flips sadly, and lands in a puddle with a noise like disappointment. You retrieve it. It falls apart in your hand. You say some words not approved by the church. You go to the quartermaster to ask for wax, or tar, or a miracle. He gives you a soggy rag and a shrug. You consider trading your soul for sunlight. You're not entirely sure you still have a soul, though. You may have bartered it for dry bread 2 days ago. That night, the rain finally stops. Not all at once. It sputters, coughs, and then fades into mist like a grumpy old man realizing no one's listening. You crawl out of your tent like a creature reborn, blinking at the unfamiliar moonlight. The camp is silent, except for a few soldiers sobbing in relief and the sound of someone angrily wringing out their underpants. You check Martha. She's still warped, still damp, but she's intact. You whisper apologies and promises and set her out gently in the pale moonlight, like a medieval spa treatment. She doesn't snap in half, which feels like forgiveness. You fall asleep that night under a half-dry blanket, surrounded by mildew, ruined arrows, and the faint smell of your own despair. But you're warm, and tomorrow, you think, you might actually hit something. The feast begins with shouting, which is a good sign. Not the "we're under attack" kind of shouting, but the "someone brought beer" kind, which is both louder and slightly more hopeful. A pig is roasting on a spit that definitely used to be part of a fence. A fire crackles under it, like it has something to prove. Tables are dragged out, crooked and mismatched, covered in questionable cloth and more questionable stains. Someone plays a lute badly. Someone else tries to sing over them, also badly. You arrive in full gear because you've learned to never trust a celebration without an escape route. There's no assigned seating, only open bickering over who sits closest to the bread. You wedge yourself between Ferret and a knight who insists on calling you lad, even though you're fairly certain you're older than he is. Ferret's already halfway through a mug of something that smells like fermented hope and broken promises. You ask what it is. He grins and says, "Don't." You don't. The food appears in waves, mostly bread, some meat, a very enthusiastic pudding. You eat like a starved raccoon who's just been handed a tavern menu. The pig is surprisingly tender. The cheese is suspiciously squeaky. The onions bite back. You're halfway through your second helping when someone behind you yells something about victory and swings a tankard so wide it splashes half its contents into your hair. It is not water. It is goose fat. You do not ask why. You do not move. You simply sit, slick and glistening, trying to remember what dignity used to feel like. The knight next to you pats your back with the sincerity of a man who has never felt consequences. Ferret wipes a drumstick on your cloak and says, "You shine now, like a hero. You shine like a kitchen accident." You sigh. Music continues. A young squire attempts a dance that looks more like a controlled fall. Agnes claps along while sharpening something unnecessarily large. Tall John tries to juggle turnips. Someone passes you a horn of drink. You sip. It burns like betrayal and regret, but you keep sipping anyway. Around you, the night grows louder, warmer, and more surreal. A goat is in attendance. No one explains the goat. Eventually, the revelry begins to blur. Not from drink, though that helps, but from sheer emotional exhaustion. You drift away from the firelight, your boots sticky with spilled ale, and your dignity somewhere under the table. You settle near the edge of camp under a lantern hanging from a bent spear. Your arrows are laid out beside you like weary soldiers, which, to be fair, they are. Half are bent, a few are missing fletching. One has a mushroom growing on it, which feels deeply symbolic. You pull out your chicken feathers, not because they're ideal, but because they were free. Technically, you found them on a coop floor next to a very angry hen. You don't talk about it. You begin the delicate process of tying feather to shaft, which should feel meditative, but mostly feels like fighting a small, uncooperative bird ghost. The thread slips from your fingers. You mutter curses old enough to get you excommunicated. A small group of soldiers stumbles past, arm in arm, singing something about trousers and betrayal. You pause your fletching to listen, just in case it's autobiographical. One of them waves to you, trips on a rock, and keeps singing from the ground. You return to your arrows. You wonder if this is how legends start, sitting alone with sticky hair, attaching poultry parts to wood, while half the camp plays Pin the Blame on the Cook. You wonder if, someday, children will chant your name in stories told by firesides, if bards will sing about your aim, your bravery, your uncanny ability to smell slightly like dinner. You imagine a statue of yourself, bow in hand, chin lifted proudly, fletching feathers tucked neatly. No, artistically, into your quiver. Maybe there's a plaque. Maybe it reads, "Here stood the archer, friend of kings, enemy of rain, goose-fat survivor." You burp. It's loud. It echoes. And just like that, the vision fades. You finish one arrow, then another. You drop the third and have to fish it out of a puddle. The fourth is your masterpiece. Straight, balanced, slightly singed on the end from where Ferret knocked it into the fire earlier, but still proud. You name it, Jeremy. You never name arrows. You make an exception. Jeremy feels special. The feast rages on behind you. Someone's laughing too hard. Someone's crying too loud. A dog, maybe the goat, howls in confusion. You smell smoke, honey, and the distant memory of whatever clean clothes used to be. Your hands are cramping, but the rhythm is familiar. Feather, glue, bind, test the weight. Whisper a small prayer to Saint Sebastian, patron of people who get shot a lot. You glance up at the stars. They're not twinkling so much as blinking down at you like exhausted celestial parents. You raise your mug toward them in a silent toast. They do not reply, but they also don't explode, so you call it a good omen. The night wears on. You make a pillow from your quiver. It's terrible. You try anyway. You close your eyes to the sound of laughter and lutes, your arrows bundled beside you, your hair still faintly glistening. The world is loud, messy, and smells like meat. But you're here. You're alive. You're full. And you're pretty sure Jeremy's going to hit something important tomorrow. Maybe even on purpose. Maud appears in a swirl of herbs and judgment. She smells like rosemary, moss, and loathing. Her apron is stained with things that once bled, and her expression says she doesn't have time for your nonsense, or anyone else's, unless they're actively dying, and even then, only if they don't whine about it. You are, quite literally, struck dumb, not by love, at least not at first, but by an arrow string that snapped across your hand because you were showing off. Again. In your defense, you did hit the target. Unfortunately, the target was Agnes's mug. Maud doesn't say, "Hello." She says, "Sit down," and you do, without questioning why you're suddenly terrified of a woman who carries a satchel full of suspicious jars and a knife longer than your forearm. She inspects your hand like it's offended her. You try to be charming, but it's difficult when you're sweating and faintly whimpering. She dabs something on the wound that smells like death and betrayal. It burns. She doesn't notice. Or worse, she does. You archers are always bleeding on things, she mutters, wrapping your hand with the efficiency of someone who's done this 100 times and would prefer not to do it 101. You think you're clever. You're not. You're string monkeys with delusions of grandeur. You decide then and there that you are in love with her. You spend the next day testing theories about whether pain is a suitable flirting strategy. It is not. You accidentally slice your thumb while sharpening an arrow. She rolls her eyes and hands you a rag without looking up from her work. You sprain your ankle, stepping off a rock that absolutely moved. She tells you to limp somewhere else because she's busy. You draw your bow too fast and pop your shoulder out of alignment. She resets it with a grunt and an audible snap, and you make a noise like a wounded duck. She pats your head afterward. You see heaven. The others notice. Tall John starts calling her your terrifying forest wife. Ferret writes a song called The Healer and the Idiot and performs it nightly with dramatic sobbing. Agnes offers to fire an arrow into your leg to speed the romance along. You decline, mostly because you're not convinced she would miss an artery on purpose. You start visiting the healer's tent under increasingly flimsy excuses. You ask about salves for phantom itches. You inquire whether bees in your helmet count as a medical emergency. You bring her feathers and mushrooms and once, very unwisely, a live mole. She accepts none of them, except the feathers. She uses them to dust things in ways that feel vaguely insulting. Maud has eyes like thunderstorms and hands like tree roots. She moves with the quiet confidence of someone who's won arguments by staring. She rarely smiles, but when she does, it's because someone else has fallen over or said something idiotic. And you cherish those moments like relics. You learn to make her laugh. Once, a small exhale of amusement when you trip over your own bow and land in a puddle, arms out like a drowning cat. She doesn't help you up, but she does say, graceful, and for a second, you feel like a king. She hates archers. You accept this as part of your penance. Too much pride, she says once, grinding roots into paste. Too much showing off. Too many poems about your aim and your arrows and your tragic hands. You hide your unfinished poem under your jerkin. She glances at you without turning. Don't. You consider becoming a pikeman out of spite. You practice scowling in the mirror and trying to look like someone who enjoys melee combat. It lasts a day. You get hit in the face with the butt of your own borrowed spear and spend the evening with a nosebleed and a renewed respect for sticks with strings. Maud snorts when you tell her, stick to arrows, twig boy. You never want to be called anything else again. She stitches a tear in your cloak one afternoon with all the grace of a blacksmith. It's uneven, but sturdy, and she says nothing about it. You thank her. She shrugs. Better than bleeding on it again. You offer to teach her archery. She declines with such speed that it might qualify as a sport. I've got better things to do than watch grown men miss trees. You say you only miss trees when they move. She stares at you for 5 seconds, then walks away. You count those seconds for the rest of the night. One morning, you find a bundle on your bedroll. It's a salve for string burn and a clean bandage. No note. Just practical care in an impractical world. You carry it around like a lucky charm. Ferret catches you smelling it once. You deny everything. He writes a sequel to his song. You try to impress her in battle by not dying. She does not comment on your survival. You take it as a compliment. Eventually, she lets you sit beside her while she works. You don't talk much. She doesn't like noise, unless it's from boiling water or cutting herbs. You help grind bark into powder. You stir a pot. You watch her sort plants by color and severity, and think this must be what peace feels like. At one point, she leans against your shoulder briefly, like it's a mistake, like gravity just happened to tip her your way. You don't move. When she pulls back, she says nothing. Neither do you. You shoot better the next day. Not because of love, but because for the first time in a long while, you want to come back alive. Just in case she asks. You spot the rabbit at dawn. It's bold, twitchy, and sitting in the exact place rabbits are not supposed to be when you're trying to show off for Tall John, who is watching with the smug expression of someone who hit 3 acorns in a row yesterday and won't shut up about it. You raise your bow with exaggerated confidence, knock the arrow like you've rehearsed for an audience, and whisper something to Martha, your beloved longbow, about glory, destiny, and finally being taken seriously. You release, the rabbit vanishes like it was never there, and from behind a bush to the left, a full arm's length left of where you were aiming, comes a sharp squawk, a flurry of feathers, and the sound of your dignity crumbling. A duck bursts from the underbrush like a small, furious cloud. It is not dead. It is very much alive, and it is very, very angry. You lower your bow and stare at the duck in horror, because somehow, you missed the entire woodland rodent you aimed at and nailed an airborne insult with webbed feet and an attitude. The arrow grazed its wing. Not fatal, not even serious, but enough for it to imprint you as the enemy for life. Tall John is laughing so hard he nearly swallows his own teeth. You try to apologize to the duck. The duck does not accept. The duck, in fact, begins to follow you. It starts as a fluke. You shuffle off the range, muttering to yourself about wind and divine sabotage, and the duck waddles behind you. You stop. It stops. You turn. It turns. You take a step. It quacks. You keep walking. It keeps quacking. You are now being publicly judged by a bird with unresolved trauma. By midday, the duck has acquired a name. Agnes calls it Harold. Ferret starts feeding it bits of biscuit. Maud glances at the wing once and declares it superficially injured, permanently dramatic, which feels like a personal attack, but you're not sure if it's aimed at you or the duck. Harold camps beside your tent. He honks when strangers approach. He also honks when there's no threat whatsoever, just to remind you he exists. The others begin to treat him like part of the unit. At roll call, Tall John says present and then Harold with a salute. Nobody laughs anymore. This is your life now, you and a duck. You try to lose him. You walk in circles. You climb a tree. You dive into a river. Harold follows, flaps, and swims like a bird possessed. He climbs onto the bank with a drenched dignity that somehow makes you feel like the villain. You offer him a breadcrumb as a peace treaty. He pecks your hand. You deserve it. Somewhere along the way, Harold stops being just a duck and becomes something else. An emblem, maybe, or a metaphor, or your only stable relationship. He sleeps at your feet like a dog. He glares at Maud like he knows something you don't. He pecks Ferret when the loot comes out. You begin to confide in him because, frankly, who else is going to listen to your extended monologue about how the tree line is definitely shifting when you're not looking? You even start to enjoy the company. You talk to Harold about battle formations and arrow weight ratios and how you once had a dream where you defeated a knight by outstaring him. Harold responds with a blink. This is better than most of the conversations you've had with your commanding officer. There's a moment, just after a long day of marching through mud, boots full of regret, and socks full of betrayal, when you sit down on a rock and sigh deeply, the kind of sigh that only people who have tried to scrape leeches out of uncomfortable places can produce. Harold hops up beside you, nuzzles your side once, and lets out a quiet, almost understanding quack. You don't cry, but you think about it. The duck becomes legend. There are whispers among the other companies. Tales of the archer with the war duck. One soldier swears he saw Harold chase off a squirrel that was stealing rations. Another insists he witnessed the duck bite a nobleman's horse on the ankle. The story grows. Eventually, someone from the Night Corps nods at you with respect. You're not sure if it's because of you or the bird. You don't ask. You win your next archery contest. It's not because of skill or technique or divine intervention. It's because you were aiming at Greg again, and Harold waddled into view at just the right moment, and you adjusted mid-shot. The arrow hit a perfect bullseye. The crowd cheered. Harold quacked twice and strutted away like he planned it. You consider making him a tiny helmet. One night, while the others are sleeping, you look at the stars and say out loud, "I think I'm growing as a person." Harold responds by pooping on your boot. You take that as encouragement. Eventually, you find yourself wondering what life would be like without him. The thought is unsettling. You've started turning when he honks, like it's normal to have a feathered shadow. You've stopped flinching when he pecks at your quiver. He has claimed it. It is his now. You don't even try to reclaim the arrows he naps on. You accept your place in the hierarchy. The day Harold saves your life is a Tuesday. A bandit jumps out from the woods, yelling something unintelligible about taxes and turnips. You're reaching for your bow when Harold launches himself forward with the grace of a cannonball and bites the man on the shin. The bandit screams, drops his dagger, and flees into the trees with a furious duck flapping after him like vengeance incarnate. You never get your arrow off. You don't need to. From then on, Harold is no longer the duck. He's Harold the Defender, Harold the Avenger, Harold the Absolute Unit. You try to get him knighted. The Lord says no. You ask again. The answer remains no. You start carving a tiny crest anyway. You and Harold. Against the world, forever bonded by a single poorly aimed shot. You line up with the rest of the soldiers, boots scuffed, tunic smelling vaguely of onions and shame, hands open and hopeful like maybe, just maybe. This is the time someone remembers you have needs, basic ones, like food, and the ability to buy a new pair of socks that don't feel like damp regrets wrapped around your feet. The quartermaster stands behind a crooked table, flanked by two guards who look like they've been sculpted entirely out of gristle and spite. He calls names one by one, like it's a royal ceremony instead of a slow-motion disappointment parade. When it's your turn, he doesn't look up. He grunts, reaches into a sack that probably once held actual currency, and drops a single dented coin into your palm. You wait, expectant. He raises an eyebrow like you've just requested the moon and gestures to the left, where a young boy hands you a hunk of bread so dry it may actually be a fossil. Then, the quartermaster pats your head. Like a dog, you stand there, stunned, holding your treasure. One haunted loaf, one coin that might not even be real, and the echo of a hand that clearly thought you were shorter. You consider mutiny. Just for a moment. A quick rebellion. A small one. You and maybe Ferret and Agnes storming the supplies tent, demanding actual money, or at least bread that doesn't double as a blunt weapon. But then you remember two things. One, your last attempt at authority involved you trying to bluff at dice and losing both your boots and your pride. And two, Agnes once punched a tree and won. You are not the revolutionary hero this army needs. Instead, you trudge back to your tent. Harold follows, eyes the bread, and sneezes at it like even he has standards. You try to gnaw a corner. It fights back. You lose. You examine the coin. It's vaguely circular, smells like cabbage, and depicts what might be a horse, or possibly a misshapen fish. You ask Tall John if it's legal tender. He squints and says, maybe if you squint harder and pretend you're in the wrong country. You tuck it into your pouch anyway, right next to the button you're pretending is lucky, and the rock you think looks slightly like your uncle. You try to trade the bread for something. Anything. But the merchant just laughs and throws in a dish rag as a sympathy gift. You think about eating the dish rag. You don't, but you think about it. You head to the village, coin in hand, dreams of roast meat and cider in your eyes. You find an inn that doesn't smell entirely like feet and tragedy, and order the cheapest ale they have. The innkeeper looks at the coin, snorts, bites it, chips a tooth, and pours you a cup anyway. The ale is warm, flat, and tastes like someone tried to ferment sadness, but it's drinkable, barely. You drink it like it owes you money. Harold sits beside you under the table, pecking at a scrap of carrot someone dropped, radiating quiet judgment. You try to explain economics to him. He farts. You consider that a counter-argument. Back at camp, someone's dog wanders near. It's big, fluffy, and has eyes like it's seen war and walked away unimpressed. You hold out the bread, hoping to earn a friend or at least a loyal companion who won't sass you with feathers. The dog sniffs the loaf, sneezes violently, and walks away to urinate on your tent. You sit down, stare at the loaf, and wonder what your life has become. You once dreamed of glory, of riding into battle, arrows flying, foes falling at your feet. Now you are bribing indifferent animals with medieval croutons and losing arguments to poultry. You take another sip of your pity ale and contemplate career changes. Maybe you could become a traveling juggler, or a monk, or a very well-dressed beggar with a duck. The others arrive in waves, each with their own variation of disappointment. Agnes got a slightly less stale loaf and a coin with a hole in it. Ferret got 2 coins, but one turned out to be a flattened button. Tall John got a half loaf and a cough. The grumbling begins. Someone suggests writing a letter to the king. Someone else suggests the king can't read. Spirits are low. Bread is thrown. None of it breaks on impact. You begin to suspect the loaves are actually made of hardened sorrow and regret. Later that night, you break off a piece and try to toast it over the fire. It doesn't toast. It just sort of smolders. Harold hisses at it like it's possessed. You throw it into the woods. You hear a fox yelp in the distance. You pretend it was on purpose. You ask Maud how much a healer makes. She says not enough, and that archers are bad for business because they bleed too much and too often in places that require a lot of stitches and patience. She also asks why your tent smells like dog pee and disappointment. You don't answer. Harold answers with a honk. She leaves. Eventually, you lie back on your sad excuse for a bedroll, coin clutched in one hand, stomach growling. The stars are out. They don't care. You imagine explaining your salary to someone from the future. Yes, you'd say. I risk my life regularly for the promise of coin. What do I get? A single metal disc that may be fake, and bread that could double as siege equipment. No, I cannot afford shoes. You fall asleep dreaming of soft pillows and buttery rolls and money that isn't made of disappointment. Harold curls up beside you, warm and slightly damp. You don't ask why. You just let it happen. You've been paid, technically. You try not to think about it. You were trying to scratch your ankle. That's how it begins. One innocent itch beneath your bootstrap. One clumsy lunge forward while holding an arrow in one hand and half a sausage in the other. And the next thing you know, your foot slips on something profoundly slimy, possibly mud, possibly something more sentient. And you launch forward with the grace of a stunned chicken. You let out a noise that cannot reasonably be called a yell, but is too tragic to be a squeak. And in that same moment, your hand releases the arrow purely out of betrayal. It sails, it arcs, it pierces the exact center of the target everyone else has been missing all morning. For a moment, the world is quiet. You are face down in the grass, mouth full of someone's discarded handkerchief, contemplating the trajectory of your life choices. Then someone screams. Cheers erupt. Tall John lifts you bodily from the mud like you are some sort of war god reincarnated in poorly stitched trousers. Agnes punches the air. Ferret drops his drink. Someone shouts, "The blind bowman," and you're not sure whether they mean your trip or your general personality. But before you can clarify that no, this was not deliberate, and also your ankle is now shaped like a question mark, someone hands you a cup of mead and a crown made of daisies. You accept both. This is how legends are born. Not from strategy, not from valor, but from tripping on a worm and becoming the hero of the day because no one else was paying attention to your intent. By evening, the campfire is roaring and someone's roasting something suspicious that used to make oinking noises. Songs are sung. Someone is already writing verses about your mystical, sightless precision, despite the fact that your eyes are perfectly functional and currently watching Greg glare at you from the shadows, like he's considering archery-based sabotage. You think about correcting the record, telling them the truth, standing up, well, wobbling slightly, since your ankle still crunches, and proclaiming, "Friends, I am but a humble fool who was defeated by mud and meat products." But then someone hands you another cup of mead. This one is spiced. It tastes like warm victory and very poor decision-making. You drink it. A bard. Where did the bard come from? Starts singing about how you were cursed by a forest spirit, blessed with the gift of fate-guided arrows. The tale now involves a mystical owl, a dream vision, and something called the Mark of the Seer. You don't even know what that means, but your tunic does have a mysterious stain on it that might qualify. The mead continues. So does the fame. By midnight, people are asking you to bless their arrows. One guy even hands you a sock and says, "For luck." You nod solemnly and bless it by sneezing on it, which somehow makes him cry with joy. Maud passes by once, mutters "imbecile" under her breath, and tosses a healing salve at your head with just enough force to leave a small bruise. You consider this a compliment. Harold, your increasingly bitter duck companion, has taken to biting anyone who gets too close. You assume this is his way of guarding your legend, or possibly he just hates crowds. Either way, he gets his own saucer of mead and drinks it like a tiny, angry knight. The next morning, your head feels like it's been repurposed as a smithy and someone is forging horseshoes behind your eyes. You stumble toward the latrine, only to be stopped 3 times by admirers. One wants a lock of your hair, one wants to duel you, one just wants to watch you breathe, which is unsettling, but you allow it, because blinking hurts. Ferret claps you on the back and says, "You're a star now, lad, a living legend," and you try to respond, but mostly just emit a croak and gesture vaguely toward your ankle, which is now twice its normal size and gently glowing. You hobble to the healer's tent, where Maud takes one look at you, sighs, and mutters something about peacocks with pointy sticks. She sets your ankle with all the compassion of someone folding laundry angrily. By afternoon, there's a scroll being passed around with an artistic rendering of your heroic shot. It looks nothing like you. It's far too muscular and appears to be crying a single tear of justice. You pin it to your tent anyway. You try to practice actual shooting, hoping to regain some control of your own reputation. You miss 3 targets in a row, trip again on the same patch of malicious earth, and nearly shoot Ferret in the toe. He doesn't mind. "You're just conserving your magic," he says, grinning like a loon. "Can't waste it on practice, can you?" You begin to understand how bards keep their jobs. By the end of the week, you've been dubbed the Oracle of the Bow, Arrow Saint, and once Sir Wigglefoot, which you assume is from a child but can't confirm because it was whispered ominously through your tent flap at midnight. Still, you're not mad. Not exactly. You get extra rations. The quartermaster gives you bread that doesn't chip teeth. You're allowed to skip latrine duty, and someone even offers you a blanket that doesn't smell like goat romance. Harold has a new ribbon. Life is strange, but it's better. Eventually, there will be another battle, another moment when all eyes are on you, and someone will expect the blind bowman to land a perfect shot under pressure while riding a horse, blindfolded, and possibly on fire. That day is not today. Today, you lounge in the sun, ankle propped on a rock, mead in one hand, and Harold resting on your knee like a judgmental paperweight. You gaze at the distant targets, wonder if you'll ever hit one on purpose again, and decide it doesn't matter. Legend has already taken over. You just try to keep up. The summons arrives just after dawn, when you're mid-snore, and Harold is nesting in your hood like an aggressively feathered hat. A boy with a trumpet louder than his sense of timing blares a fanfare directly into your dreams, which turn instantly from pleasant field frolic to full-on battlefield panic. You lurch upright, knock over your own wash basin, and shout something deeply unheroic about socks. The boy informs you, with all the pride of a fish announcing a storm, that His lordship requires your immediate presence for a matter of utmost urgency. You try to ask what that means, but he's already halfway gone, chasing his own echo through the tents. You have questions. None of them are answered. Ferret claps your shoulder, snorts, and says, "Special mission, eh? Guess you're important now." You don't believe him. No one sends archers on special missions. Archers are sent places with vague instructions like, "Stand over there and don't get stabbed." If someone's sending you to meet the Lord himself, it can only mean two things. You're either being punished, or you're about to become a cautionary tale. You brush the feathers out of your hair, tug your least disgusting tunic over your head, and march toward the Lord's tent with the grim resignation of a man headed to both his reward and his reckoning. Inside the tent, which smells faintly of incense and roasted pigeon, the Lord regards you with the expression of a man who's just realized he's out of wine. He gestures vaguely and says, "You there, archer, you're trusted." The word hangs in the air like a bee looking for something to sting. You nod slowly, trying to look honored and not like someone who once got lost in his own camp. He continues, "You will take this scroll to Baron Alric. It must be delivered unopened. Do not read it. Do not smudge it. Do not drop it. Is that clear?" You agree. Of course you do. You bow deeply, take the scroll reverently with both hands, and promise by all that is holy and slightly inconvenient that it will reach Baron Alric intact. You feel proud, responsible, possibly promoted. This feeling lasts 11 minutes. You are barely past the goat pens when disaster strikes. Specifically, a goat named Humphrey. He is a brute of an animal, known for chewing on armor and biting people's elbows. You had assumed this reputation was exaggerated. You are incorrect. Humphrey appears like a woolen comet, knocks over your pack, and eats the scroll. Just like that, you stand there, mouth open, watching centuries of noble diplomacy disappear into a digestive tract known mostly for burping. Harold flaps his wings once in disbelief, then he walks away, clearly ashamed to be associated with you. You try to retrieve it. Of course you do. You lunge, you grab. Humphrey headbutts you into a bucket of suspicious liquid that smells like turnips and loss. By the time you regain your footing, the scroll is gone. Humphrey bleats with triumph, then passes gas so violently it startles a chicken into flight. There is no plan, no backup copy, no messenger pigeon trained in medieval encryption. Just you, a goat with secrets, and the dawning horror of your professional ruin. You consider fleeing the country, becoming a traveling minstrel, faking your own death, but instead, you sit down with a stick of charcoal and the back of a chicken ledger and begin to rewrite the scroll from memory. You remember roughly 3 phrases: "To Baron Alric," "in the matter of grain tithes," and something about honor-bound enforcement, which you're fairly certain isn't a metaphor. You make up the rest. At first, you try to sound official. "His lordship doth request the swift and discreet execution of provisions under the royal seal," you write. It sounds plausible, but then you remember you're missing entire paragraphs, so you begin to fill the space with flourishes. Then you get bored. Then you get inspired. Soon, you're writing limericks. There once was a baron named Hugh, whose taxes were terribly due. With parchment and pen, we ask once again to send back a chicken or two. You stop yourself, rewrite it, add a sketch of a seal, not the royal kind, the actual animal. You don't know why. It felt right. 3 days pass. You sleep in a ditch. You spill ink on your socks. You are chased by a swarm of bees that may or may not be enchanted. Eventually, you arrive at Baron Alric's camp, covered in brambles, goat bruises, and spiritual fatigue. The guard eyes you suspiciously. "You the courier?" You nod. He shrugs. "Bit late." You hand him the scroll. He doesn't even open it, just tucks it under his arm and waves you toward the mess tent. That's it. No questions, no trumpets, no divine punishment. Apparently, no one cares that the official document now includes a verse about turnips and love letters. Or maybe they read it and just assumed it was noble flair. Maybe they liked the bit about the seal. Maybe politics is just poetry with more bloodshed. You eat stew that tastes like regret and cabbage. Harold reappears, pecks your shin, and steals a biscuit. The Baron himself passes by at one point and says, "Ah, the blind bowman. Heard of you. Good shot that." You smile awkwardly and say nothing. When you return to your own camp days later, Ferret asks how the mission went. You tell him it was successful. "Of course it was," he says. "You're trusted now." You laugh, though you're not sure if it's funny. The goat still roams the fields. Sometimes you think it's watching you. You hope it forgets the limericks. The encounter begins, as all deeply confusing moments of your life seem to, with a squirrel making poor decisions. You're crouched near a mossy stump, minding your business and contemplating whether the bread in your pack is still technically bread, or just a firm suggestion of bread, when the squirrel drops an acorn on your head. You look up. It stares down. You exchange glances that could mean war, but before diplomacy can occur, a voice behind you says, "Don't move, unless you're planning on donating those boots." You freeze. Not out of fear, though, yes, also out of fear, but mostly because you're still processing the phrase, "donating those boots." You turn your head slowly, and there he is, a bandit. Cloak, hood, smug expression, all very dramatic. He has a dagger, which is sharp, and a smile, which is sharper. He gestures casually to your satchel, your belt pouch, and, with a flick of his chin, your quiver. "All of it," he says, in the bored tone of someone ordering the usual at a tavern. You open your mouth to protest, but he cuts in. Before you ask, "Yes, I'm robbing you." "No, this isn't personal." "Yes, you do smell faintly of goose." You hand over your pouch first. It contains 2 copper coins, a dice carved from bone, and a half button you've been meaning to sew back on your jerkin for 3 months. The bandit weighs it like it might contain treasure, then shrugs and pockets it. Next, your satchel. Mostly lint, a dried apple, and a letter from your cousin describing the symptoms of a very specific rash. The bandit reads 2 lines, pales slightly, and stuffs it back in without further comment. Then, your arrows. He inspects them with a surprising amount of reverence, picks one up, spins it between his fingers, tests the point with his thumb. "You fletch these yourself?" he asks. You nod. "Not bad," he says. "Nice balance. Broadhead's a little loose on this one, though." You blush. You were meaning to fix that. The bandit holds up one arrow, your favorite, the one with the raven feather, the one that hums when you string it just right. "Now this," he says, "this is a beautiful piece of work." He pockets it. You feel your stomach twist, a horrible cocktail of robbery and artistic criticism. "That one's named Elspeth," you mutter. "Took me a week to shape the shaft just right. Then Elspeth and I will have a meaningful relationship," he replies, not unkindly. "And don't worry, I'm very respectful of craftsmanship." He turns to leave, then pauses. "Wait," he says, "you're the one they call the blind bowman, right?" You blink. That's a nickname." "I can see, fine. Right. But you hit that target while falling down a hill and choking on a beetle, didn't you?" You nod. "There's no point pretending otherwise. You're in a forest being robbed by a man critiquing your arrow balance. Pride has long since vacated the premises." The bandit grins. "I saw that. Good draw technique. You anchor at the cheekbone. Clean release. No twitch." You don't know what to say. You've never been complimented mid-theft before. "Thanks," you say, because your manners apparently outrank your sense of survival. He nods once, solemnly. "Keep practicing. Shame to see someone with form like yours end up full of regrets and squirrel droppings." I had chacked his arrow. With that, he turns and vanishes into the trees, as if absorbed by the foliage itself. You sit there, blinking, robbed but validated. It's hard to tell. The emotions are tangled. You check your quiver and find your remaining arrows all still intact, minus Elspeth. You sigh. She would have wanted it this way, you think, tragically imagining her flying through some other poor soul's airspace. Then, out of spite, inspiration, or sheer emotional chaos, you take a fresh shaft and begin carving a new arrow on the spot. You name this one Steve. Why Steve? Because that was definitely a Steve kind of bandit. Polite, efficient, not above light banter. Steve, the arrow, ends up straighter than anything you've ever made. You fletch him with the last of your crow feathers and balance him 3 times on your fingertip to be sure. You whisper something vaguely mystical over him because it feels appropriate. Steve gleams under the dappled sun like destiny incarnate. The next day, you test him on a rotten stump pretending to be a deer. Steve hits dead center. You test him again on a melon that Ferret has declared inedible. Steve splits it in 2. You test him on a fish because Agnes dares you. Steve catches dinner. Word starts spreading. You don't encourage it, but you don't exactly stop it either. Soon people aren't just calling you the blind bowman. They're asking about your signature arrow, the one that never misses. Is it true you blessed it in a holy spring? Did you carve it under a blood moon? Was it fletched with phoenix feathers? You shrug. You don't lie. But you also don't tell the full truth, which is that your magical arrow was inspired by a well-mannered mugger with strong opinions on draw technique. Maud hears the story secondhand and asks if Steve is a metaphor. You say yes, then immediately regret it because now she's using words like emotional compensation weapon. Harold, the duck, remains unimpressed. He refuses to let Steve near his pond. Eventually, another battle comes, as they always do, and you bring Steve. There are banners, drums, horses, defecating nobly. You knock Steve with a reverence that feels almost sacred. You let fly. Steve arcs perfectly through the sky, lands in the enemy commander's helmet plume, and knocks it clean off his head without harming a hair. The commander falls backward in surprise. His horse panics. Your side surges forward, convinced they've witnessed divine intervention. Steve returns to you hours later, carried in the beak of a passing crow who seems smug about it. You hold Steve aloft, people cheer. You think of the bandit, wherever he is, probably stealing from someone less polite right now. You raise your cup that night in his honor, to Steve, to limericks, to getting robbed and somehow winning anyway. The noble's son arrives on horseback, flanked by 2 squires, 3 servants, and what appears to be a traveling perfume cloud. His doublet costs more than your entire existence. His boots are embroidered. His bow is pristine, unused, and probably enchanted by some wizard who owed the family a favor. You, meanwhile, have a half-buttoned jerkin, an eyebrow singed from a cooking incident involving too much stew and not enough logic, and a headache forming purely from proximity. You are told, quite firmly, that this is a great honor, that the Lord himself has requested you, of all the bow-wielding peasants in the realm, to personally instruct his beloved only son, Lord Flavian Elaric, something the fourth, in the noble art of archery. You are not told why the Lord hates his son, but the fact he picked you suggests vengeance. Lord Flavian is about your height, half your weight, and has the emotional resilience of a damp sponge. You introduce yourself. He sneezes and asks if you've been washed recently. You haven't. You consider that a point in your favor. You try to start with the basics. He wants to begin with the part where I shoot apples off heads. You explain, gently, that before one can shoot apples, one must learn not to shoot feet. He frowns like you've told him he can't marry his horse. You hand him a bow. He holds it like it's diseased. You guide his fingers. He says, "Ow," even though nothing has happened. You knock the arrow for him, help him draw, and whisper, "Steady." He releases the string too soon and immediately slaps himself in the nose with his own hand. He drops the bow and shrieks like a haunted kettle. "I've been attacked," he gasps, clutching his face. "This is abuse." You explain, as politely as your fraying patience allows, that what he just experienced is called a bowstring, and that it reacts to gravity and tension, not personal vendettas. He tells you that physics is no excuse for cruelty. By midday, he's managed to string the bow incorrectly, bend 3 arrows, and somehow insult every animal within a 10-foot radius by declaring that even ducks know I'm nobility. Harold, who has followed you to the lesson out of morbid curiosity, tries to bite his boot. You do not stop him. Lord Flavian calls for a break, which involves sitting on a velvet cushion while a servant applies rose water to his wrist, and a different servant feeds him tiny pastries. You eat a beetle by accident and try not to cry. The squires titter behind a tree. One of them whispers that the last tutor lasted 2 days. The other says you've already broken the record. You do not feel victorious. When the lesson resumes, Flavian declares that archery is undignified, that real warriors use swords, and that he only agreed to this because his father promised him a pony. You point out that you once took down a boar with a single arrow and no pants on, but somehow this fails to impress him. He asks if you've ever competed in a royal tournament. You say no. He says, "Exactly," and tries to wink but only blinks slowly like a lizard. When he next draws the bow, he turns it sideways like he's aiming for dramatic flair instead of accuracy. You tell him not to. He insists it looks cooler this way. You tell him he'll hurt someone. He says you're just jealous. He lets go. The arrow flies straight into a barrel of pickled cabbage behind you. The lid explodes. Fermented vegetables rain down like the wrath of a particularly pungent god. Everyone is silent. Then he claps. "I meant to do that," he declares. A warning shot. You are reassigned that afternoon. You are told, again, firmly, that the noble's son has very delicate nerves, and that someone of your demeanor might not be the best instructor. You are given a new assignment. You will now be guarding the pigs. You are escorted to the pen by a captain who refuses to meet your eyes. Harold waddles behind you with the smug air of someone who always knew this would happen. The pigs look up as you arrive. One of them snorts approvingly. Another rolls in mud and winks. You are not sure if it's affection or indigestion, but you take it as a compliment. The pigs are easier to manage than Flavian. They do not shriek at bowstrings. They do not require velvet cushions. They do not demand their arrows be engraved with the family crest. You feed them. You talk to them. One of them listens better than any student you've ever had. His name is Stumpy. Stumpy learns to sit. You teach him how to detect rustling in the woods. He becomes your second in command. You find that pigs are very effective judges of character. They avoid Greg. They adore Maud. They once chased Ferret into a tree for trying to steal a turnip. You reward them with scraps and songs. Sometimes, at night, you imagine Flavian trying to command a battlefield. He'd ride in on a sparkling pony, declare himself invincible, and immediately get tangled in a tent rope. You smile in the dark and thank the pigs for their company. A week later, you hear a rumor that Flavian mastered the bow and vanquished a target with a single shot. The target was a loaf of bread. The bow was held by his servant. The story still spreads. You don't mind. You have Stumpy now, and Harold, and a job that doesn't involve reapplying perfume every time someone sweats. It's not glamorous, but it's honest, and no one cries when the bowstring slaps them, except Ferret, but he deserved it. You're halfway through scraping mud off a pig named Gregory when the dream hits you again. The same one, like a rerun your brain won't cancel. You're standing tall on a hill, cloak fluttering behind you in a dramatic wind that doesn't mess up your hair. Your quiver is full, your boots are clean, and there's an inexplicable choir singing in the background. In front of you, a knight holds out a hand, an apple balanced perfectly on his gleaming helmet. The crowd gasps. You draw, you release. The apple splits like a juicy prophecy. The crowd erupts into applause. People hoist you up on their shoulders. A villager weeps into a handkerchief. Somewhere in the distance, a bard begins composing a ballad. You save a village from a bandit ambush with a single arrow. Someone hands you a pie. Someone else kisses you. Maybe it's Maud. Maybe it's the duck. It's all very emotionally satisfying. Then you wake up to the snort of a pig attempting to eat your boot. There is no wind. There is no apple. There is, however, a draft up your tunic, because the pigsty door refuses to close properly and also possibly hates you. Your boots are soaked with something that isn't quite mud. Your quiver is being used as a chew toy by a goat that wandered in uninvited, but now refuses to leave because you gave it a name. It's Steve II. Harold the Duck sits on the fence rail, watching with a gaze that suggests he has lost all hope in your career trajectory. You sigh and flick straw off your sleeve. The dream lingers like a stain on your ego. You could be great. You want to be great. You once hit a flying pheasant from 30 paces while sneezing. You once shot an arrow through a ring Agnes threw in the air just to see if you'd miss and humiliate yourself. You didn't. You were magnificent. She still doesn't talk about it, but pigs don't care about glory. They care about food and mud and breaking into your tent to sit on your blanket and snore like a lumberjack with allergies. You climb the fence and grab your bow. It's still got a bit of hay stuck in the grip and something that might be beetle juice on the string. You clean it off with a corner of your sleeve and look out toward the woods. No bandits, no knights, just trees and the faint sound of ferrets singing off-key about onions. Maybe you could practice, just a little. Maybe line up a few melons and pretend they're the heads of the enemy, or politicians, or Greg. You could pretend there's a crowd watching, that the sky is clear, that you're not standing in muck while a pig named Ophelia loudly relieves herself near your tent. You set up 3 cabbages on stumps. It's not apples. It's not a knight's head, but it's close enough if you squint and lack standards. You draw the bow. Harold cocks his head. You fire. The first arrow goes clean through the cabbage and lands in a bucket someone left behind a tree. It makes a pleasant thonk. You blink. That felt good. You knock another. The second arrow shaves a few leaves off the next cabbage. Not a bullseye, but still fatal if the cabbage were, say, sentient and mildly threatening. The third arrow hits the stump dead center. No vegetable contact. You glare at the cabbage like it insulted your lineage. You hear applause. It's slow, sarcastic, and accompanied by the sound of chewing. It's Agnes. You fighting the salad now? She says, leaning against a fence post and munching on a raw carrot like a warlord with scurvy. You lower your bow and try to look noble. This is hard to do with a beet stain on your tunic and a pig chewing your shoelace. She nods toward the target zone. Nice grouping. Still can't aim left, though. You make a face. It was windy. There's no wind. You gesture wildly. The pigs exhaled. It threw me off. She snorts. Sure. You could tell her about the dream, about the pie, the kiss, the applause, but you don't. You just mutter something about working on your form and pretend your bowstring didn't just squeak in protest because you've neglected it for 2 days straight. Agnes walks off without another word. She's like that. Comes and goes like a blunt arrow in a shallow target. Makes her point. Leaves a bruise. Disappears into the woods to probably punch a bear. You shoot a few more times. The dream won't leave. You want it so badly it's starting to ache, not just in your arms, but in that hollow spot between your ribs, the one usually filled with regret and undercooked stew. You want to be remembered for more than the pig watch, more than the scroll incident, more than being the blind bowman who got famous for tripping. You want the moment, the shot, the pie. You hear snuffling behind you. The pigs have gathered. They're watching you with their squinty little eyes and their judging little snouts. One of them, Stumpy, probably, grunts in a way that sounds suspiciously like disapproval. You nod solemnly at them. One day, you whisper, I'll hit a real target, a heroic target. Harold quacks. It sounds like mockery. You go to bed with straw in your hair and 3 new mosquito bites, but the dream follows you again. This time, the apple is bigger. The bandits are louder. The kiss is longer. The pie has whipped cream. You smile in your sleep. Tomorrow, you'll shoot again. Maybe not for glory, but maybe just to prove to the pigs that they're wrong about you. Your boots are soaked before the battle even begins. Not with heroic blood or sacred wine or the tears of your enemies, but with dew. Just dew. A perfectly innocent field wetness that has conspired to make your toes squelch with every step, like you're sneaking into war wearing sponge cake. The morning fog curls around the camp like a nervous ghost, and the men around you are too quiet. Not the normal kind of quiet. This is the kind that sticks to your skin and makes your heartbeat sound like a drumline in your ears. Someone is praying. Someone else is vomiting. You are polishing your arrows with your sleeve and pretending not to panic. You've had dreams like this. In the dreams, you are fast and fearless. Your hair doesn't stick to your face with stress, sweat, and you never, ever, ever forget which eye is your dominant one. In real life, your quiver strap is chafing your shoulder. Your bowstring has decided to behave like a toddler mid-tantrum, and Ferret just handed you a boiled egg and said, "For luck." He then bit the egg in half and walked away. You don't know if the luck transfers via saliva, but you eat your half anyway. The order comes from the commander in the form of a hand wave and a barked grunt that could either mean advance or please pass the cheese. You assume it's advance. The line of archers begins moving like a single nervous animal. You take your place, feet set, shoulders loose, eyes scanning the horizon. You can't see the enemy yet, but you can hear the horns, war horns, loud, deep, the kind of noise that makes your stomach drop like it realized it left the oven on. Then you see them, a wall of bodies in steel, marching over the ridge like a thundercloud with legs. Horses, spears, banners, the whole grim parade. Someone yells, arrows start flying. You do not hesitate. You knock an arrow and pull. The string sings. The arrow sails. It hits a man riding a horse, right in the chest. You don't know who he is. You don't care. He drops. You knock another. The sky is chaos. Arrows zip past, some from your side, some not. Men scream. Horses rear. Drums beat. You are not screaming. You are not thinking. You are moving. Another arrow flies. It finds a commander. You think, he has a lot of feathers and yells louder than the rest. You silence him. A wave of noise crashes behind you, your own men cheering. You blink. You're the reason. You shoot again and again. Your arm aches. Your fingers blister. You lose count. You lose track. The world narrows to the pull of the bowstring and the hiss of the arrow leaving. You feel nothing. You feel everything. Someone tries to flank. You see him. You don't think. You draw and fire, and he drops before he can lift his blade. A horse bolts past you, riderless, eyes wild. You dodge left, trip over a rock, fall into mud, roll, come up shooting. The arrow punches into someone's throat. You are terrifying. You are grace and death and mud-covered socks. You are that archer. Agnes yells something at you as she charges by with a spear. You don't catch the words. It's either good shot or you smell like cabbage. Could be both. Harold is perched on a cartwheel nearby, watching the carnage with a regal calm that says, "I always knew you were capable of mass destruction." He flaps once, as if saluting you. You feel absurdly validated. The tide of battle shifts. The enemy begins to retreat. You chase them with arrows. You watch them scatter like beetles from a dropped boot. You feel power hum in your veins, like a war drum's echo. You do not remember being this good. You didn't know you could be this good. The fog lifts. The shouting dims. What's left is breathing, groaning, the soft sound of weapons dropping from numb hands. You're still standing. Your quiver is empty. Your bow is scratched, stained, and bent slightly to the left. You are alive. Somehow, Ferret comes hobbling over, a bloody rag around his leg and a grin splitting his face. "You see that?" He pants. "You were like a whole damn murder cloud." You don't know what a murder cloud is, but you nod anyway. Tall John limps past with a busted helmet and gives you a thumbs up. A real one. No sarcasm. You blink. This is what respect feels like. It's slightly confusing. You sit down beside Harold. He hops into your lap, ignoring the blood and filth, and tucks his head under your chin. You are now officially being comforted by poultry. You don't even question it. Across the field, the enemy is dragging themselves away, leaving behind armor, arrows, and the realization that you are not just the blind bowman anymore. You're something else now, something sharper. You lean your head back and breathe deeply. The sky is blue again. The birds are singing. One of them is Harold, probably judging the pitch. You did it. You lived. You made a difference. And no one even shot you in the leg this time. Your body wakes up before your brain does, which is unfortunate because your body is very upset. Your shoulders creak like the hull of a sinking ship. Your spine feels like it lost a fight with a battering ram. Your fingers have become abstract art, red, cracked, and permanently molded into the shape of a bow grip. You try to stretch and emit a sound somewhere between a groan and the final death rattle of a particularly melodramatic goat. You're lying in a pile of something that smells faintly like onions and blood, possibly both. You hope it's not yours. Across the field, you can hear the victory celebrations still going strong. Somewhere, someone is singing a song about a goat and a butter churn. You are not in the mood for goat songs, or butter, or noise, or being conscious. Your bow, loyal and equally traumatized, lies beside you like a war-weary companion. The wood is scratched and smeared with something that may or may not be human. It looks tired. You pat it with a shaky hand and murmur, "Same." You sit up slowly, and your entire body protests like a peasant taxed for the third time this week. Your knees have become rumors. Your back has filed a formal complaint with God. Even your earlobes hurt, and you're not entirely sure how that happened. Around you, the aftermath of glory unfolds. Soldiers stagger past, laughing and bleeding in equal measure. Someone is trying to wring wine out of a helmet. Someone else is weeping into a loaf of bread. Agnes strolls by with a bandage wrapped around her head and a grin that says she punched someone important. You believe her. You try to stand. Your legs do not agree. You compromise and kneel dramatically, which feels vaguely spiritual and mostly pathetic. A monk appears beside you, as if summoned by the sheer weight of your existential collapse. He's bald, smells like candle wax, and has the kind of serene expression that implies he's either found inner peace or just doesn't understand what's happening. He hands you a bowl of soup. You stare at it. It stares back. It's gray, vaguely lumpy, and emits steam like it's hiding something. You nod politely, because he's a monk and probably blessed or magical or something, and raise the bowl to your lips. You take a sip. It is, without question, the worst thing you've ever tasted. It's like drinking warm regret flavored with bark and penance. You gag, swallow out of politeness, and thank him. He smiles like he's just saved your soul. Maybe he has. You sit in silence for a while, sipping monk soup and watching the sun rise over a field of broken armor and muddy footprints. There's a kind of beauty in it, if you squint. The light hits the dew on the grass and makes it look like everything is glittering, which feels wildly inappropriate given the number of corpses still being collected. You stare at your bow again, Martha. You never asked to be her soulmate, but here you are. Two scarred sticks held together by spit, sweat, and some light trauma bonding. You wonder if you're still just a farm boy with decent aim, or if you've become something else entirely, something dangerous, something competent. The idea is unsettling. You remember the first time you held a bow. You dropped it. Then you hit a tree. Then you hit yourself. You've come far. Not gracefully, but far. You stretch your legs and wince. Every muscle feels like it's been replaced with an angry squirrel. You take another sip of soup and try not to cry. Harold waddles over and sits beside you like a judgmental ghost. The duck is covered in battle dirt and inexplicable glitter. You don't ask. You're afraid he won't answer, and more afraid he will. I think I'm having an existential crisis, you say aloud. Harold blinks once and farts. Profound. You look around at the survivors, your fellow archers, a few foot soldiers, a knight who is currently chasing his horse with a sword held like a broom. You are among them, part of them, not just background anymore. You mattered. It's unsettling. You were supposed to be disposable, an arrow flinger, a background blur with okay aim and strong opinions about poultry. And yet, here you are. Not just alive, but remembered. Celebrated. Your name shouted in the chaos. Your shot that turned the tide. You drink more soup. It hasn't improved. A child runs past waving a broken sword and yelling, "I'm the archer." You blink. You're being impersonated. Badly. You allow it. The kid trips and faceplants into a turnip. History will be kind to you, apparently. Ferret finds you later with a flower crown and a bottle of something that could be wine or vinegar. He offers both. You decline. He shrugs and drinks them together. You lie back in the grass, eyes closed, soup bowl on your chest. You let the morning wrap around you like a slightly damp blanket. The aches remain, but now they feel earned, like medals you wear inside your skin. You feel reborn, not in the grand, mystical way, more like the way bread is reborn as toast, burnt, changed, still technically food. You've survived, you've changed. You may never be the same, and that's terrifying, but also kind of thrilling. You take one last sip of soup, gag quietly, and set the bowl aside. Tomorrow, there may be more battles. Tomorrow your bow might snap, or you might. But today, you're here, alive, aching, confused, and weirdly, that's enough. You return to the village the way all seasoned warriors do, limping slightly, covered in dried mud that may also be blood, and carrying more emotional baggage than actual belongings. Your boots are held together with hope and one desperate stitch. Your bow is slung across your back like an old friend who's seen too much. Harold the duck waddles beside you like he owns the place, because at this point, he might. The village hasn't changed. The roofs still sag, the sheep still look vaguely disapproving, and someone is yelling about turnips in the distance. You inhale deeply, expecting the sweet scent of home, and get a noseful of manure and wood smoke. It's oddly comforting, nostalgia, but with flies. Maud is still there. You spot her outside the apothecary, grinding something in a mortar with the kind of aggression usually reserved for tax collectors. She looks up as you approach and immediately frowns. It's a familiar frown, practiced, fond, disappointed. You know that frown. You love that frown. Well, if it isn't Twig Boy, she says, arms crossed and eyebrow raised. I thought you'd be dead by now. You shrug with casual heroism and try not to wince. I'm very hard to kill. She inspects you like you're a questionable herb. You smell like failure and duck. Harold quacks in betrayal. You both ignore him. You help repair roofs. It's not glamorous, but there's a certain peace in climbing ladders and hammering shingles, while old ladies shout unsolicited advice from below. Your arms ache in new ways. Less from pulling a bowstring, more from trying not to fall into a chimney. You learn that hammers are just less aerodynamic arrows that punish hubris. Children ask you to shoot things, not people, which is a refreshing change, but apples, tin cups, and once, a suspiciously lifelike cabbage. You oblige. You miss the first few times, mostly on purpose, to build suspense. Then you land a clean shot, and they cheer like you've slain a dragon. One child hands you a drawing of Sir Twiggy the Archer, which appears to depict you riding Harold into battle. Harold approves. Someone names a pig after you. You're not sure how to feel about that. On the one hand, you're immortalized. On the other, the pig keeps escaping and getting stuck in fences. It's uncanny. You sleep in your old bed again, which is somehow both too small and too lumpy, like your childhood tried to fold itself in half. You dream of arrows and soup and shouting commanders. You wake up tangled in your blanket with a pillow stuck to your face and Harold pecking at your toe. It's good to be home. The villagers ask questions. What was it like? Were you scared? Did you kill anyone? Did you meet the king? Did you bathe? You answer with vague nods, half-truths, and a dramatic retelling of how you single-handedly saved a goat from enemy forces. They gasp in all the right places. You don't correct them. You start walking differently. Not like a soldier, exactly. More like someone who's been dropped, dented, and somehow stuck the landing. People notice. They nod with respect now. Or maybe confusion. Hard to tell the difference here. You start helping in ways that surprise you. You carry water. You chase off wild dogs. You teach a boy how to string a bow and not cry when it slaps his arm. You teach a girl how to aim, and she outshoots you within a week. You pretend not to notice. She does a victory dance anyway. Maud sees you watching and smirks. You're getting soft. You look at the girl dancing, the children laughing, the roof standing, the pigs escaping. You nod. Maybe. You walk with Maud in the evenings. She tells you about herbs. You tell her about battles. She's unimpressed by bloodshed, but deeply interested in which plants you mistook for food and how long you vomited afterward. You pretend to be offended. She pretends to believe you were ever competent in the wild. One night, she hands you a small jar of ointment without comment. You use it. Your hands feel better. You don't thank her. She doesn't expect you to. Harold takes to perching on your roof like a weird feathered gargoyle. He hisses at visitors and has started collecting shiny things in a nest that includes a spoon, a button, and what you're fairly certain is one of your old teeth. You let him be. Everyone needs a hobby. You think, sometimes, about leaving again. About riding into another battle, being another hero, shooting another arrow that changes everything. But then you remember the soup, the rain, the pigs. You remember Maud's eyes when you almost said goodbye. You remember how she didn't flinch when you didn't. You stay. The village doesn't need a hero. It needs someone to fix shingles and chase children and show them how not to shoot their own foot. You can do that. You're good at that, mostly. You realize slowly that you don't miss the war. You miss the moments between the chaos, before the arrow flies, after the laugh fades. But those moments are here too. In the hammering, the stories, the soup that doesn't taste like penance. You're not the same as you were. You're scarred. You're tired. You're better. Someone leaves a fresh loaf of bread on your doorstep. No note. Just warm, soft bread, and the kind of silence that means someone sees you. You tear a piece off and offer it to Harold. He takes it, waddles in a circle, and flops dramatically. You do the same, but less gracefully. You've made it, somehow. The bow has been sitting by the hearth for weeks, quiet and still, collecting a layer of dust like a retired sword in a badly written epic. Martha, as always, is patient. She leans against the wall like she knows exactly what you're thinking before you think it. You've passed her every day, pretending not to see her, like ignoring an ex at the market. She says nothing, because she's a beau, and also deeply passive-aggressive. You've told yourself you're done. No more arrows, no more mud-soaked battles, no more blisters, no more explaining to villagers that no, you don't shoot apples off heads for fun, and no, your duck does not do tricks. You have pigs now, roofs to fix, a girl who throws herbs at you when you sneeze. Things are good, predictable, safe, and yet your fingers twitch, not from cold or age or some dramatic tremor of fate, but from memory. They curl, ghost-like, reaching for something that used to be part of you. You rub your thumb along your palm and feel the faint ridge where string used to bite skin. It's faded, but still there, like it's waiting. The children are playing outside, using sticks as swords and yelling about dragons. One of them has a wooden spoon and is insisting it's a magical lance. Another is arguing that Harold is technically a wyvern. Harold is deeply unbothered and currently eating something that used to be bread and is now mostly dirt. You glance at the bow. You tell yourself it's just for maintenance. Just a quick check. You're being responsible, like oiling a door hinge. Except the hinge once took down a horse at full gallop and made a night cry. You pick it up. Your hand finds the grip without hesitation. It fits. Too well. Like putting on a shirt you thought you outgrew, only to realize it's still your favorite. The leather is cracked in familiar ways. The wood creaks as you move, but not in protest. In greeting. You test the string. It hums. Low, quiet. A note of recognition. You fetch a single arrow from the bundle Maud keeps in the back of the pantry for emergencies, which she defines as any time you start sighing too dramatically. The fletching is neat, probably hers. You suspect the feathers came from Harold. He's always molting near her window. You step outside. The village is drowsy with afternoon sun. Smoke curls lazily from chimneys. The fields stretch out like someone rolled up a green blanket and forgot to fold it properly. It's calm. So, of course, now is the time to commit to minor violence. You don't aim at anything important. You're not here to prove a point. You're not even here for sport. You're here because something in your chest needed to know if it still worked. If the rhythm was still there. If the part of you that was an archer hadn't gone entirely to compost. There's a tree. You like this tree. It's got a noble, slightly crooked look to it. It also stole one of your arrows 3 summers ago and never gave it back. You've held a grudge. You take your stance. Draw. Anchor. Breathe. Release. The arrow sings through the air with a grace you had no right to expect. It curves just slightly, enough to brush a leaf off the branch with the casual elegance of a flirtatious bard, then buries itself deep into the bark with a satisfying thunk. Not bad. Not perfect. But not bad. Except you hear a rustle. A blur of fur and indignant energy bursts from behind the tree. It is a squirrel. It is extremely upset. It makes a sound like an offended kettle and sprints in a zigzag that suggests either tactical genius or sheer panic. It stops halfway across the clearing and stares at you. Hard. You wave apologetically. It chitters in a way that promises revenge, then disappears into the underbrush like a tiny, furious warlock. You suspect you've just made an enemy for life, or possibly reincarnated the spirit of a fallen druid. Either way, you will check your shoes before putting them on from now on. You lower the bow. It feels okay, good, even. You're not back. You're not the archer who once accidentally took out a helmet, a tree, and yourself in a single volley. But you're something. Someone who remembers. Someone who still knows how to find the line between breath and motion, between stillness and speed. Maud appears beside you with that uncanny ability she has to sneak up on people despite being very loud and very unimpressed at all times. She holds a mug. It smells like something illegal. Shooting squirrels now? She asks, sipping. It was an accident. You hand her the bow. She takes it, tests the weight, and shakes her head. Still too big for you. You'd be faster with a crossbow. You shudder. Blasphemy. She smiles, faint and wicked. Glad to see you haven't changed. Harold waddles up and pecks your ankle. He seems to be siding with the squirrel. You sit on the grass together, watching the sun dip low. You talk about mundane things. Turnip blight, whose chickens are haunted, whether or not Greg is technically cursed. The bow lies beside you, not heavy, not forgotten, just there, like it always was. You won't go back, not fully. The wars, the camps, the noble son crying over a string slap, that's behind you. But maybe, once in a while, you'll draw the string and feel the hum again, not for glory, not for coin, just to remember who you were, who you still are. You're not just the boy who joined for bread and stayed for chaos. You're Twig Boy, and you still hit the mark.